Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and the strange corners of our planet get a little softer in the dark. Tonight, we're heading into the North Caucasus, into a rugged mountain landscape where stone ridges rise above quiet villages. Old stories travel easily from one generation to the next, and the Earth itself seems to keep its secrets in narrow cracks and hidden chambers. Our gentle journey is about a place that sounds almost too unusual to be real. A deep shaft in the Khara-Hora mountain area of Russia, an underground opening with walls that some visitors have described as too straight, too smooth, too strangely shaped to feel like an ordinary cave. It is a place that has been called a natural fracture, a megalithic mystery, a prehistoric shelter, an ancient ventilation system, and depending on who is telling the story, perhaps the forgotten doorway into something much larger beneath the mountain. But before we climb toward that strange dark opening, I would love to know where in the world are you listening from tonight? Are you somewhere bright and busy, with the day still moving around you? Or are you already tucked into the quieter hours, when the house settles, the outside world fades, and even the biggest mysteries can be explored gently, without rushing? There is something fitting about thinking of hidden caves and buried stone passages, while people are listening from different rooms, different cities, and different little pockets of night. Some of us may be near flat streets and soft rain. Some may be near mountains of our own. Some may be listening with a cup of tea nearby, which, as always, is one of humanity's simplest and most reliable research tools. If you find this kind of slow expedition soothing, intriguing, or simply a comfortable way to let the day loosen its grip, I would be very grateful if you gave the video a like and maybe subscribed. It helps this quiet corner of the internet reach other curious wanderers who enjoy earth mysteries, ancient ruins, strange landscapes, and stories that do not shout but whisper from stone. And as always, I do hope this is interesting enough to keep you company, but not so exciting that it keeps you awake. If you do drift off somewhere between the first ledge and the deepest chamber, do not worry. The mountain will still be there in the morning, waiting with all the patience that mountains are famous for. So settle in, let your thoughts slow down, and imagine the North Caucasus at dusk. The slopes are darkening. The air is cooling. Above the village, the mountain mass of Khara-Hora sits in its familiar place, not especially famous to most of the world, not surrounded by crowds, not polished into a tourist attraction, with signs and gift shops and someone selling suspiciously expensive fridge magnets. It is simply there, rising above the land, layered with rock, weather, memory and rumour. From a distance, it may not look like the entrance to a mystery. Most hidden things do not announce themselves. They wait under grass, behind loose stone, inside folds in the landscape, until one day a person notices that something is not quite ordinary. That is the mood of this story. Not a golden temple glittering in the sun, not a pyramid standing proudly on a desert plain, not a ruin with columns, carvings, and a neat little label telling us who built it and when. The Khara-Hora Shaft is different. It is an absence, a drop, a dark vertical cut in the mountain. A place where the earth opens downward instead of upward, where the first question is not what stands here, but what goes below. And that question has a way of pulling the imagination after it, because holes in the earth are never just holes to the human mind. They become entrances. They become warnings. They become the start of stories. A cave may be a shelter, a grave, a temple, a mine, a hiding place, a water channel, or just the result of rock doing what rock does over very long periods of time. Yet when a cave has unusually straight walls, narrow passages, and blocks that appear fitted together in a way that reminds people of construction, the mind begins to look for hands, human hands, ancient hands, hands that cut, arranged, smoothed, measured, and vanished. This is what makes Khara-Hora so interesting. It sits right on the border between two powerful explanations. On one side, there is geology. The North Caucasus is not a calm piece of earth. It is a region shaped by uplift, pressure, faulting, volcanic materials, erosion, landslides, and all the slow violence that mountains carry in their bones. Nature can make straight lines. Nature can split rock into slabs. Nature can create walls so flat that a tired explorer hanging on a rope in a shadowy shaft might look at them and think, well, that seems suspiciously tidy. Anyone who has seen basalt columns, limestone joints, crystal fractures, or the blocky sides of a cliff knows that the Earth is perfectly capable of geometry without needing a foreman, a blueprint, or a prehistoric committee meeting. On the other side, there is the argument that Khara-Hora feels too unusual to dismiss so easily. Some visitors have pointed to the smooth vertical surfaces, the rectangular character of sections of the shaft, the impression of stone blocks, and the sense that the underground space may have been altered or used in some unknown way. They ask whether this could be more than a natural crack. Could it have been widened? Could it have been part of a larger underground complex? Could an ancient group have discovered a natural fracture and turned it into something useful? Could it have served as a shaft for air, water, ritual, storage, hiding, or escape? And of course, the biggest question of all, could it belong to a forgotten civilization whose engineering skills were much greater than we usually imagine for the prehistoric past? Now we should take a calm breath here, because Earth mysteries can become very dramatic very quickly. Give a cave one smooth wall, and by lunchtime someone has connected it to Atlantis, giants, ancient astronauts, and possibly a lost power station that also made excellent soup. The sensible path is slower. It asks what we know, what we do not know, what has been measured, what has only been claimed, and what still needs proper investigation. The Khara-Hora Shaft is mysterious partly because of what has been seen, but also because of what has not been done. It has not become one of those famous deeply studied archaeological sites where teams return year after year with careful surveys, published reports, dating methods, geological mapping, and patient disagreement over coffee. Much of its public reputation comes from explorers, local accounts, television segments, alternative researchers, and scattered reports that do not always agree with each other. And yet sometimes that is exactly how a mystery begins, not with certainty, but with an odd report from a remote place, a local discovery, a narrow descent, a photograph, a rumour of smooth stone, a claim that the mountain contains a chamber below, a claim that the shaft is not alone, a whisper that strange sounds have been heard from cracks in the ground, a warning that the place is dangerous, a story that someone went searching and did not return quite the same, or did not return at all. Most of these details must be handled carefully, but they are part of the atmosphere around Khara-Hora. An atmosphere matters because mysteries do not live only in stone, they live in the way people speak about stone. The North Caucasus is a perfect setting for that kind of layered story. It has always been a crossroads. Mountains are often described as barriers, but they are also corridors, refuges, lookouts, and hiding places. People have moved through the Caucasus for thousands of years, carrying languages, tools, beliefs, conflicts, trade goods, and legends. The landscape itself encourages memory. Deep valleys hold villages. High passes feel like thresholds. Cliffs and caves appear suddenly, like half-open doors in the side of the world. It is not difficult to understand why local traditions might attach meaning to unusual openings in the ground. When a mountain seems to hum, or a shaft drops farther than expected, or a cave wall looks as though it was shaped by intention, people will talk. They always have. Khara-Hora is often linked with the village of Zayukovo and the surrounding Baksan area, a region not far from Nalchik in Kabardino-Balkaria. The name itself has been translated in local explanations as referring to a dog and a boar, because the mountain outlines were once said to resemble those animal forms. Whether one sees the shapes or not, the idea gives the mountain a kind of personality. it is no longer just a ridge. It becomes a landmark that people remember through images, creatures, and old descriptions. And somewhere within that mountain mass, or near it, the shaft waits. Imagine approaching it without the noise of the internet around you. No thumbnails, no dramatic titles, no deep voice telling you that scientists are baffled. Just rock, scrub, wind, and the careful steps of someone climbing toward an opening. The entrance does not need to be enormous to be unsettling. A narrow hole can be more powerful than a grand doorway, because it gives less away. A grand doorway says, people were here. A narrow dark shaft says, something is below, but you will have to decide whether you are brave or foolish enough to look. The first descent into such a place is never casual. Even trained cavers treat vertical spaces with respect, because the earth is not built for human convenience. Ropes, helmets, lights, harnesses, and calm nerves become essential. The opening may lead to a ledge, then a tighter section, then another drop. Stone may shift. Loose blocks may hang overhead. Air can feel stale. Sound changes. A voice that seems ordinary outside becomes small and strange in a shaft, bouncing off the walls and returning as if someone else is answering from below. The body understands before the mind does that down is not the same as forward. Down carries weight. Down carries risk. Down feels like entering the mountain's private thoughts. What explorers noticed at Khara-Hora, according to many accounts, was not only the depth but the shape. But portions of the shaft were described as rectangular, or almost rectangular, with surfaces that seemed surprisingly even. In a natural cave, people expect irregular curves, rounded erosion, jagged pockets, and chaotic edges. But here, some sections appeared more disciplined. The walls seemed to descend with a kind of flatness that invited comparison to cut stone. That does not prove artificial work. It only explains why the question arose. A straight wall underground is like a straight line in a forest. It catches the eye. The brain leans forward. It asks, who made that? Then come the blocks. Some descriptions speak of large stone forms or block-like surfaces in a lower chamber, giving the impression of megalithic construction. Again, that impression can be tricky. Geological fractures can divide rock into blocky masses. Tuff and other volcanic or sedimentary materials can break along plains. Pressure can create clean separations. A chamber formed by collapse can look, in poor light, like a room built from huge pieces. But the alternative thought remains tempting. If the blocks were placed, not merely broken, then the mountain would no longer be just a mountain. It would be architecture. Architecture underground changes everything. A natural cave may be old, but an artificial underground structure is a message. It says that someone had a reason to go below. Someone organised labour. Someone understood stone. Someone wanted a space hidden from the weather, enemies, heat, cold, or perhaps from the ordinary world above. Underground spaces are not easy to build, especially in hard mountain rock. They require tools, planning, patience, and a purpose strong enough to justify the danger. This is why the Khara-Hora Shaft has become so magnetic to people interested in lost civilizations. It offers that rare and tantalizing possibility that what looks like a geological wound may also have been adapted by minds we do not yet understand. But good mysteries do not become weaker when ordinary explanations are allowed. They become stronger. Because the real question is not simply artificial or natural. The real question is how much of each. Many ancient sites began with nature. People used caves as shelters, widened cracks into passages, carved tombs into cliffs, cut temples into rock faces, and built walls against natural formations. Nature provides the first draft and humans edit. It is entirely possible, in principle, for a natural shaft to have been noticed, entered, modified, used, feared, abandoned, and later misunderstood. It is also possible for a completely natural shaft to inspire generations of human stories, because its shape feels meaningful. The difficult part is knowing which story the evidence supports. Khara-Hora sits in that uncertainty. It has enough strangeness to invite speculation, but not enough widely accepted study to settle the matter. There are maps and surveys from carvers. There are geological opinions suggesting a natural tectonic origin. There are alternative interpretations suggesting the shaft may have served some practical ancient role. There are local stories of underground sounds. There are claims about nearby symbols and artifacts. There are links, sometimes careful and sometimes very loose, to wartime activity in the Caucasus, when Nazi forces moved through the region and showed a documented interest in mountains, symbols, ancient origins, and mythic geography. The Caucasus, with its peaks and deep history, became the kind of landscape where military history and occult rumour easily tangled together. That does not mean every wartime story connected to Khara-Hora is true. It means the region carries enough history for strange associations to attach themselves. During the Second World War, the Caucasus was strategically important because of oil, routes, and territory. German forces reached parts of the region, and the famous story of the Nazi flag on Mount Elbrus remains one of the more symbolic moments of that campaign. Around such real events, other tales have gathered, tales of hidden expeditions, secret searches, ancient signs, and mountain mysteries. Some are based on testimony, some are probably exaggerations, some may be local memory reshaped by time, but in a story like Khara-Hora they add a darker edge. The shaft is no longer only prehistoric or geological, it becomes part of a broader landscape where modern violence once passed over ancient stone. And then there are the deaths and disappearances that people sometimes connect to the mystery. Here too we must walk carefully. Death can turn research into legend very quickly. An accident becomes an omen. An illness becomes a curse. A person's unfinished work becomes evidence that they were close to something dangerous. Human beings are natural pattern makers, and grief is one of the strongest pattern makers of all. Yet the fact remains that when those who searched for a site die young, or under troubling circumstances, or leave behind unanswered questions, the story deepens whether or not the facts justify the feeling. The Khara-Hora Shaft has collected this kind of atmosphere. It feels, to those drawn to it, like a place where answers move just out of reach. Perhaps that is why it works so well as a mystery for a quiet night. It does not demand that we believe every claim. It asks us to sit with uncertainty, to imagine a mountain shaft that might be a natural crack, or might be an altered passage, or might be both. To think about the way stone can mimic construction, and the way construction can disappear into stone. To consider how easily a remote place can become famous online, and still remain poorly understood on the ground. To remember that the earth is filled with shapes we have not fully studied, and that not every strange shape is a lost civilization, but not every old human achievement has been recognized either. The safest thing to say at the beginning is this: Khara-Hora is not yet a solved story. It is a place of claims, surveys, doubts, local memory, geological explanations, and unanswered possibilities. It's a shaft in a mountain that has been looked into, but not perhaps looked into enough. It reminds us that mystery is not always found in distant jungles or under desert sand. Sometimes it sits near a village behind loose rock in a narrow vertical cut that a person can descend only with a rope and a steady breath. And once someone has gone down and come back saying the walls are too smooth, the passage too strange, the chamber too suggestive, the rest of us cannot help leaning a little closer. So tonight, we begin at the surface, in the fading light above the North Caucasus, before the full story drops into darkness. The mountain stands quietly. The entrance waits. The first accounts begin to gather around it, some cautious, some excited, some already reaching far beyond what can be proven. And somewhere between the sensible geologist, the local storyteller, the explorer with a rope, and the dreamer imagining a prehistoric engineering project, the Khara-Hora Shaft begins to take shape as one of those rare places where the Earth seems to ask a question before anyone has even stepped inside. The story usually begins in 2011, not with a grand expedition, not with a university team arriving in matching jackets, and not with a dramatic government announcement that a great secret had been uncovered beneath the North Caucasus. It begins much more quietly, the way many Earth mysteries begin, with local people noticing that the mountain had changed. A slope had shifted, stone had moved, the surface had opened just enough to reveal that something dark lay behind it. In a landscape like the Baksan Gorge, where cliffs, ravines, loose rock and narrow paths are already part of everyday life, one more break in the stone might not seem important at first. Mountains crack, rain loosens slopes, frost wedges itself into rock and slowly pries it apart. Landslides happen. But this opening was different enough to make people look twice. Imagine standing there at the edge of it. Not in the comfortable way we look at mysteries from a screen, with the room warm and the danger safely edited into a story, but actually standing on the side of the mountain with your boots on uneven ground and your breath moving a little more carefully than usual. The entrance is not bright. It does not invite you. It is a dark break in the rock, and when a beam of light is pointed inside, the darkness does not immediately give way. It simply absorbs the light and holds its shape. The first feeling is probably not excitement, it is caution. Because a hole in a mountain is not like a doorway in a house. A doorway says someone built this for you to walk through. A mountain opening says only that the earth has left a gap, and it does not promise that you will enjoy what is inside. The first reports describe a shaft going downward into the mountain, narrow, steep, and unusually regular in places. That detail matters, because the human eye is very quick to notice regularity. We may not be experts in geology, engineering, or prehistoric construction, but our brains are trained to detect patterns. A straight edge catches our attention. A flat wall feels different from a rough one. A corner, even an imperfect one, can make us pause. In a natural cave, we expect the messy patience of water, pressure, and time. We expect curves, bulges, cracks, pockets, mineral drips, and surfaces that look accidental. But when a vertical shaft seems to have walls that descend with surprising smoothness, the old question rises almost by itself. Did nature do this, or did someone help? That question was strong enough that local speleologists and researchers began to take an interest. Speleology, the study and exploration of caves, is not a hobby for people who like comfortable chairs. It requires patience, technical skill, and a very respectful relationship with gravity. A cave explorer has to think about rope, air, loose stone, falling debris, narrow passages, and the simple fact that underground small mistakes can become large problems. So when people began entering the Khara-Hora Shaft, it was not just a casual walk into a hillside, it was a descent. That word carries a different feeling. You do not simply go in, you go down. Some later accounts name the speleologist Arthur Gemukov as one of the key figures connected to the discovery and early exploration of the site. Around him, the story has become part local history, part underground adventure, part unresolved investigation. In many tellings, he was not only curious about the shaft, but deeply interested in what it might mean. This is important because discoveries are shaped by the people who make them. A geologist might see a fracture system. A caver might see a dangerous but fascinating route. An archaeologist might look for tool marks, occupation layers, and datable material. A local historian might connect the place to old stories. A person already open to the possibility of lost ancient structures might see architecture in the dark. The same stone can inspire different questions depending on who is carrying the flashlight. The descent itself is often described as leading through a deep vertical section before opening into a larger underground space. The shaft, according to many reports, drops roughly 40 meters before reaching a wider chamber, though different descriptions sometimes give different figures for the explored depth. That should not surprise us too much. Remote underground places are difficult to measure neatly, especially when earlier reports are repeated, translated, retold, and mixed with speculation. Still, the general picture remains consistent enough to understand why the site became famous among mystery seekers. A narrow entrance, smooth walls, a deep drop, then a chamber below. It is a structure that feels almost arranged for suspense, as though the mountain itself had decided to write a slow introduction. Now, one of the most interesting details from the 2011 discovery is not simply that a shaft existed. Caves and shafts exist all over the world. The interesting detail is that the people who entered it felt that parts of it looked unnatural. The walls were described as flat or polished. Some sections appeared almost rectangular. The stones seemed to form surfaces and angles that reminded explorers of blocks. In the lower areas, some reports speak of large stone masses fitted close together, almost like megalithic construction. Whether that impression is accurate, exaggerated, misunderstood, or partly true is the heart of the mystery. But as an experience, it must have been powerful. You descend into a mountain expecting rock, and the rock begins to look like work. Of course, nature is very good at pretending to be an architect. This is worth remembering early in the story before we let the imagination run too far ahead in its slippers. Rock can crack along plains. Volcanic tuff can cool and separate into block-like masses. Sedimentary layers can form flat faces. Faults can create smooth surfaces where rock has moved against rock. Gravity can pull sections apart and leave narrow vertical openings with walls that look almost cut. Anyone who has walked through a canyon or stood beneath a cliff face has seen nature create shapes that seem designed. It does not need metal tools. It only needs pressure, temperature, chemistry, water, and a generous amount of time, which the Earth usually has lying around in great quantities. Still, the 2011 discovery did not fade away as just another crack in the stone. It persisted because the visual impression was unusual. The mountain seemed to contain more than a simple cave. People spoke of a shaft, a hall, smaller openings, and stones that appeared arranged in ways that demanded explanation. Some accounts mention narrow rectangular tunnels or passages leading away from the larger space. Others describe a strange block that seemed to hang or project from the wall in a way that looked almost impossible at first glance. Details like these are exactly the kind that turn a local cave into a legend. They are not enough by themselves to prove ancient engineering, but they are enough to make people ask for a proper investigation. And this is where the story becomes a little frustrating, because the best mysteries usually need the dullest tools: a careful survey, a geological report, high-resolution mapping, samples, dates, toolmark analysis, sediment study, airflow measurements, structural assessment, perhaps ground-penetrating radar around the wider mountain. These are not as exciting as saying a lost civilization built a machine inside a mountain, but they are the things that could actually move the story forward. Without them, the shaft remains in that foggy middle ground where claims gather faster than evidence. It becomes famous enough for people to talk about, but not studied enough for the talk to settle into a clear answer. In 2011, though, at the beginning, none of that larger confusion had fully formed yet. There was simply the shock of the opening. A hidden space had been found. People had gone down. They had seen walls that looked too regular. They had returned with descriptions that made the mountain sound less like a mountain and more like a sealed structure. You can understand how quickly the mind would begin to build possibilities. If it was artificial, who made it? If it was ancient, how old was it? If it was prehistoric, what kind of people had the skill and reason to create such a shaft? Was it a mine, a refuge, a ritual place, a ventilation system, an entrance into a deeper underground network? Or was it simply a natural fracture that happened to create one of the most misleading shapes in the region? The village setting adds to the feeling. Zayukovo and the surrounding area are not empty places on a map. People live there. They know the mountain not as an object of global curiosity, but as part of their local world. A ridge can be a landmark, a slope can have a name, an opening can have a story long before outsiders arrived with cameras. When the shaft appeared or became known more widely, it entered an existing landscape of memory. People had already walked near those slopes, grazed animals, watched weather move over them, and heard older stories connected to the Baksan Gorge. So the discovery was not just geological, it became social. A place that may have been hidden in stone suddenly entered conversation. There is a particular kind of excitement that comes with an underground discovery close to home. It is different from reading about ruins in another country. It says that the ordinary land around you may not be ordinary at all. A mountain you have passed many times may have held a secret behind its surface. A place known by shepherds, villagers, hikers, and local children may contain a chamber no one fully understood. That feeling can be intoxicating, and it can also make caution harder. People want the discovery to mean something. They want the mountain to have opened for a reason. They want the dark shaft to be a message from the deep past, not just a crack made by pressure and chance. This is why the earliest interpretation of Khara-Hora matters so much. Once a place is introduced to the world as mysterious, artificial, impossible, or ancient, that first impression can cling to it for years. Later explanations may arrive, but the original feeling remains. If someone says a cave has perfectly smooth walls and megalithic blocks, the imagination has already stepped inside. Even if a geologist later explains that the walls are natural fracture surfaces in tuff, the mystery does not vanish entirely for everyone. The two stories begin to live side by side. One says the mountain broke, the other says the mountain was built into. And people choose which one feels more convincing, often before all the evidence is even on the table. The 2011 discovery became especially compelling because it seemed to arrive in an age when the world should already know its own surface. We have satellites, maps, drones, digital terrain models, and phones that can tell us the nearest cafe with alarming confidence. Yet here was a deep underground feature in a mountain region, still capable of surprising people. That is humbling. It reminds us that knowing the outline of a landscape is not the same as knowing what is inside it. A satellite can see a ridge, but it cannot easily tell you whether a narrow crack below a boulder leads to a chamber. Modern technology makes the world feel smaller, but the ground beneath our feet remains stubbornly three-dimensional. There is always an under, and the under is where human imagination has always placed difficult things. The dead, the hidden, the sacred, the dangerous, the stored, the forbidden, the forgotten. So when explorers entered the Khara-Hora Shaft and found a space that seemed too regular, it naturally drew older patterns of thought around it. Maybe this was an ancient sanctuary, maybe a shelter from catastrophe, maybe a remnant of a lost mountain people, maybe a place connected to legends of underground cities in the Caucasus, maybe even something built for a purpose we no longer have words for. These ideas may be speculative, but speculation is not always useless. Sometimes it is the first rough sketch before research. The problem begins when speculation refuses to be tested. What makes the discovery so delicate is that it sits between wonder and responsibility. Wonder asks us to look closer. Responsibility asks us not to claim more than we know. It is tempting to call Khara-Hora a prehistoric megastructure outright, because that phrase has weight. It sounds dramatic. It makes the listener lean in. But a better, calmer way to say it is this. In 2011, a hidden underground shaft in the Khara-Hora mountain area drew attention because parts of it appeared unusually regular, leading some explorers and researchers to wonder whether it had been modified or constructed, while others argued that geological processes could explain its shape. That sentence is less thrilling than ancient mountain machine, yes. It will not sell as many imaginary postcards, but it keeps the door open without pretending the room has already been fully explored. Still, even the cautious version leaves us with a fascinating scene. People find a dark opening after movement in the mountain. They descend carefully. Their lamps reveal flat stone surfaces. The shaft continues down farther than expected. A larger underground space opens below. There are block-like forms and narrow passages. The first visitors come back carrying photographs, measurements, and a feeling that the place is not normal. From that moment onward, Khara-Hora is no longer just a mountain mass above a village. It becomes a question in stone. One can imagine the conversations afterward. Someone says it is natural. Someone else says natural things do not look like that. Someone asks whether old people in the village knew about it. Someone remembers a story about strange sounds or hidden chambers. Someone else wonders if the opening had been sealed before the landslide. A caver talks about safety. A local writer sees a historical mystery. A television crew, perhaps, sees the beginning of an excellent episode. And somewhere in all that noise, the shaft itself remains quiet. It does not explain. It does not defend one theory over another. It simply goes down. That silence is part of the power of underground places. Ruins above ground can be read from many angles. You can walk around a wall, see how stones are stacked, examine tool marks in sunlight, compare construction styles, and take photographs without worrying too much about slipping into a vertical void. Underground, everything is narrower. Knowledge comes by lamp beam. The ceiling may hide in darkness. A wall may look smooth until touched. A block may seem separate until mapped. A passage may appear intentional from one angle and completely natural from another. The mountain controls how much you can see at once. It gives information slowly and sometimes not very kindly. In the first years after the discovery, Khara-Hora became one of those places passed around in articles, videos, and discussions about ancient mysteries. For some, it was proof that the Caucasus once held an advanced prehistoric culture capable of building deep underground structures. For others, it was a classic case of misread geology. For many people in between, it was simply interesting, a place that deserved more careful study than it had received. That middle position may be the most useful one. It does not need to mock the mystery, and it does not need to worship it. It just says, here is something unusual. Let us look properly. The discovery also reminds us how unevenly the past is investigated. Famous regions receive teams, funding, equipment, and repeated attention. Remote or politically complicated places may not. Some sites are studied because they fit established academic questions. Others remain outside the main flow because they are difficult to reach, poorly documented, or surrounded by claims that make serious researchers cautious. Khara-Hora may suffer from that last problem. Once a place becomes heavily associated with sensational theories, careful scholars may hesitate, not because the site is unworthy, but because the public conversation around it has already become messy. That is a shame, because unusual places need careful study most of all. So the 2011 discovery opened more than stone. It opened a debate about how we recognise human work in difficult landscapes. It opened a debate about how much trust to place in first impressions underground. It opened a debate about whether remote mountain mysteries are being ignored because they sound too strange, or promoted too strongly because they sound exciting. And it opened, perhaps most importantly, a reminder that the line between natural wonder and ancient engineering is not always visible at first glance. By the time the first explorers had climbed back out, the shaft had already begun its second life. Below ground, it remained rock, shadow, cold air, and uncertain surfaces. Above ground, it became a story. That's often how discoveries change. The moment something hidden is named, described, photographed, and repeated, it starts to move through human minds. Each person adds a little emphasis. One remembers the smooth walls. Another repeats the depth. Another focuses on the megalithic blocks. Another insists that no ancient people could have made such a place. Another insists that only ancient people could have made it. The shaft itself stays still, but the story travels. And perhaps that is where we should leave it for now, with the mountain newly opened and the first question still fresh. Not solved, not dismissed, not turned into a certainty before its time. Just a dark vertical passage in the North Caucasus, discovered after the stone shifted, entered by people willing to lower themselves into the unknown, and strange enough that even a careful mind can understand why the rumours began. Because once a mountain reveals a smooth-walled shaft beneath its surface, the next thing anyone wants to know is simple, and not simple at all. What exactly did they see down there? Khara-Hora is the kind of place that becomes more confusing the longer you look at it, which is not a very polite thing for a cave to do. Most caves, even strange ones, eventually begin to explain themselves. You see where water once moved. You see mineral deposits hanging like frozen drips. You see rounded walls, collapsed chambers, animal traces, damp corners, and the slow, familiar handwriting of geology. A cave may be beautiful, dangerous, or hard to map, but it usually belongs to a recognisable family of underground spaces. Khara-Hora, at least in the way it has been described by the people who entered it, does not settle so easily into one category. It behaves like a natural crack in some places, like a shaft in others, like a chambered structure in others, and occasionally, if the accounts are taken at face value, like something that is trying very hard not to be understood. That is why the phrase cave is both useful and not quite enough. Calling it a cave makes the story feel manageable. A cave is something we know. It is a hollow in the earth. It may be formed by water dissolving limestone, by volcanic gas bubbles, by lava tubes, by tectonic fractures, by sea waves cutting into cliffs, or by collapse and erosion over long stretches of time. The world is full of caves, and some of them are so large and strange that Khara-Hora would not seem unusual just because it goes underground. But the mystery is not simply that there is an empty space beneath the North Caucasus. The mystery is that this empty space has been reported to contain geometry that feels stubbornly out of place. When explorers speak of Khara-Hora, they often describe a vertical shaft rather than a wide cave mouth. This matters because the shape of an entrance influences the entire mood of a place. A horizontal cave, even a dark one, feels like a passage. You can imagine animals using it, people sheltering inside, smoke drifting out from an ancient fire. A vertical shaft feels different. It feels like a well, a throat, a chimney, or a drain from some older system. It does not invite ordinary movement. It asks for ropes. It asks for lowering rather than walking. It places gravity at the centre of the experience. The first step is not into darkness, but over it. That alone would make it memorable, but many natural shafts are vertical. Sinkholes, tectonic cracks, volcanic vents, and collapsed cavities can all descend sharply. The more puzzling part is the reported regularity of the walls. In ordinary underground spaces, irregularity is the expectation. Rock rarely cares whether a human being would prefer a straight line. It folds, bulges, crumbles, breaks, dissolves, and grows in ways that often feel organic. Even when caves have long corridors or tall chambers, their surfaces usually show the accidents of their formation. Khara-Hora, however, has been described as having smooth, almost flat sections, surfaces that run downward with surprising discipline. Not perfect, not polished like a hotel lobby floor, and certainly not enough to declare an ancient construction project by itself, but smooth enough that those who saw it felt the need to say so. And that is how the trouble begins. Smoothness underground is a slippery clue. Forgive the small pun. A smooth wall can suggest human work, but it can also be produced by rock movement along a fault. When two bodies of stone grind past one another under enormous pressure, they can polish and scrape surfaces in ways that look strangely deliberate. Geologists sometimes call these slickensides, smooth fault surfaces marked by movement. They can be shiny, straight, and surprisingly clean. In other words, the mountain may have its own workshop, and the tools are pressure, friction, and time. No chisels needed. No ancient engineers required. Just the slow, crushing patience of the earth, which is admittedly less dramatic but much more widely available. Still, Khara-Hora does not rest on smoothness alone. The reports also mention block-like formations, narrow openings, and a lower space that some have compared to a constructed chamber. This is where the site begins to drift away from a simple cave story and into the stranger territory of possible modification. A natural fracture could have opened the first path, but could later people have entered it and changed it? Could they have widened a section, cleared debris, shaped a wall, or built supports? This possibility is more reasonable than jumping straight to a completely artificial prehistoric megastructure. Human beings have always used natural openings. We do not always build from nothing. Often, we borrow from the landscape. A cave becomes a shrine. A crack becomes a passage. A cliff face becomes a tomb. A hollow becomes a storehouse. Nature starts the sentence and people finish it. If Khara-Hora was modified, the next question is why. Underground work is expensive in energy and risk. It is not something people do because they had a free afternoon and a sudden urge to rearrange a mountain. There must be a reason. Shelter is one reason. The Caucasus has seen harsh weather, conflict, migration, and the need for defensible spaces. A deep chamber could hide people or goods. Water is another reason. Shafts can be connected to springs, drainage, or underground flow. Mining is another possibility. Mountains hold materials people want, and old mine workings can look mysterious after centuries of collapse and mineral staining. Ritual is always possible, though it is also the explanation people reach for when practical explanations are not obvious, which means it should be used carefully. And then there is ventilation. A word that may sound dull until one remembers that air is one of the most important things underground. A vertical shaft can act like a lung for a deeper system, pulling or releasing air depending on temperature and pressure. This idea of Khara-Hora as part of a larger underground system is one of the reasons it has captured the imagination. A single cave is interesting. A shaft connected to a hidden complex is irresistible. Some accounts have suggested that the opening may be only one visible part of a deeper network. Others have imagined ancient tunnels running through the mountain, chambers sealed by collapse, or artificial spaces still waiting beyond blocked passages. These ideas are not proven, but they reveal something important about the way the site feels. It does not feel, to those drawn to it, like a complete thing. It feels like an edge. A visible fragment of something that may continue. The mind loves edges. It wants to know what lies beyond the wall, behind the stone, below the floor, after the narrow bend where the flashlight cannot reach. A cave that behaves like a cave usually gives you a pattern. Khara-Hora seems to interrupt the pattern. The entrance does not simply widen into a familiar cavern. The descent feels engineered to some observers. The walls seem to answer one explanation, then deny it a few meters later. There are claims of angles that resemble cut stone, and sections where the rock appears arranged rather than broken. Yet without full scientific documentation, we have to hold all of this in a careful balance. Human perception underground is not a measuring instrument. It is affected by light, fear, expectation, fatigue, and the simple oddity of seeing stone in a place where depth and shadow flatten everything into suggestion. A wall that looks perfectly straight in a photograph may turn out to be uneven when scanned. A block that looks placed may be part of bedrock. A passage that looks cut may follow a natural joint. And yes, sometimes the reverse can be true. Something dismissed as natural may later reveal marks, sediment, or construction features that prove people were there. That uncertainty is what makes Khara-Hora feel alive as a mystery. It refuses to be easily sorted into the comfortable shelves we like to use. Natural cave, ancient structure, modern mine, wartime tunnel, local legend, geological fracture. Each shelf holds part of the story, but none seems to hold all of it without something sticking out. The region itself adds to the confusion because the North Caucasus is geologically complex. Mountains rise because the earth is squeezed, lifted, broken, and folded. Rock layers do not sit quietly like neat pages in a book. They are tilted, fractured, heated, buried, exposed, and torn open. In such a setting, unusual underground shapes are not impossible at all. The mountain has lived a difficult life, and difficult lives leave marks. But the human past of the Caucasus is just as complex. This is not an empty wilderness where no people ever had the chance to work stone. The wider Caucasus region has been home to ancient communities, burial traditions, fortified settlements, trade routes, metalworking cultures, and deep layers of human occupation. People in this part of the world knew stone, mountains, and hidden spaces. They built tombs, towers, walls, shelters, and roads across difficult terrain. So when someone asks whether ancient people could have used or altered Khara-Hora, the answer is not automatically no. The better answer is, perhaps, but we need evidence. Evidence would mean tool marks, debris from excavation, datable organic material, construction layers, artifacts, soot, bones, ceramics, or clear signs that stone was removed, shaped, and arranged by hands. Without these, possibility remains possibility. One reason people are drawn to the artificial interpretation is that Khara-Hora seems, in some descriptions, to have a kind of purposefulness. Purpose is a dangerous word in archaeology and geology because the human brain is almost too good at seeing it. We see faces in clouds, animals in mountain outlines, and intention in random scratches. Give us a shadowy chamber and a flat wall, and we begin assigning jobs. This part was a corridor, that was a support, this was an entrance. That was a ceiling stone. The brain dislikes meaningless shapes, especially in darkness. It would rather create a story than sit quietly with an unanswered form. This is not foolishness. It is part of how humans survive. Pattern recognition kept our ancestors alive. It also occasionally makes us suspicious of innocent rocks. Yet there is another side to that. If humans were never willing to notice strange patterns, many real discoveries would have been missed. Archaeology often begins when someone says that mound is too regular, that line of stones is too straight, that soil stain is not natural, that cave wall has marks that should not be there. The skill is not in refusing patterns or accepting all of them. The skill is in testing them. Khara-Hora deserves that kind of testing. Not because it is definitely artificial, and not because it is definitely natural, but because the claims around it are specific enough to examine. The smooth vertical shaft could be mapped in detail. Laser scanning could show whether the walls are planar in a way consistent with faulting or cutting. Microscopic analysis could look for tool marks or natural striations. Geological sampling could identify the rock type and the processes that shaped it. Sediment layers at the bottom could reveal whether material accumulated naturally or was disturbed by human activity. Airflow studies could test whether the shaft connects to other hidden voids. Ground surveys could show whether nearby anomalies exist inside the mountain. None of this requires speculation. It requires equipment, access, funding, and the patience to let the stone answer slowly. Until that happens, Khara-Hora remains caught between the lamp beam and the legend, and there is something quietly fascinating about that. Many famous ancient sites were mysterious before they were understood. Before excavation, before dating, before careful drawings and academic papers, they were local curiosities, strange hills, blocked doors, ruins that farmers worked around, stones that children climbed on. The line between an overlooked site and an exaggerated rumour can be thin at the beginning. Khara-Hora may one day be explained as an impressive natural fracture in a tectonically active region. It may be shown to include human modification of a natural cavity. Or it may remain only partly understood because the mountain is difficult, the evidence is limited, and the story has already grown faster than the research. There is a useful comparison here with other underground places that once seemed impossible. Derinkuyu in Turkey, for example, is a vast underground city, clearly artificial, with rooms, ventilation shafts, storage spaces, wells, and defensive features. The Longyu caves in China are carved underground chambers with regular walls and tool marks, still mysterious in purpose but undeniably human-made. Ancient mines across Europe and Asia show that people were capable of deep and dangerous underground work long before modern machinery. So the idea that ancient people could create large underground spaces is not absurd, it is well established. The difficulty is applying that general fact to a specific place. Just because humans have built underground wonders elsewhere does not mean Khara-Hora is one. But it does mean the question is not silly on its face. At the same time, the natural world has produced underground forms that easily mislead the imagination. Fingal's cave in Scotland is made of basalt columns so geometric they look like a cathedral built by patient giants. The Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland looks like paving stones placed across the shore. Limestone caves can form curtains, pillars, terraces and chambers that look almost sculpted. Fault caves can create narrow, straight passages. Lava tubes can stretch like tunnels made by a secret machine. Nature is not messy in only one direction. Sometimes it is so organised that humans feel challenged by it, as if the planet has produced architecture without us. Khara-Hora may belong to that tradition, or partly to it. What makes it especially hard to judge is the lack of a clear public record. A site like this needs diagrams, scale photographs, measured plans, rock descriptions, and independent reports. Instead, much of what circulates is fragmentary. A dramatic image here, a claim there, a translated summary, a video segment, a local researcher's interpretation, a skeptic's dismissal. The result is a mystery with many entrances and very few handrails. People can enter the story from whichever side they prefer. Believers see ancient engineering, skeptics see geology. Others see a little of both and wait for better evidence. The shaft becomes, in a strange way, a mirror. It shows us how we think about the unknown, and perhaps that is why the cave does not behave like a cave in the public imagination either. It behaves like a test. How quickly do we decide? How much uncertainty can we tolerate? Do we prefer a thrilling answer that may not be true, or a cautious answer that may not feel satisfying? Can we enjoy a mystery without forcing it to become a lost civilization before the evidence is ready? These are not only questions about Khara-Hora. They are questions about every ancient mystery, every unusual ruin, every stone structure whose builders are unknown, every shadowy chamber that appears on a screen with a title promising that history is about to be rewritten. Still, let us return to the mountain itself, because the real place is more interesting than any argument around it. Picture the shaft again. The air is cooler at the entrance. A rope hangs into the dark. Dust and small stones shift under a boot. The first few meters swallow the daylight quickly. The walls come close, and the beam of a headlamp slides over surfaces that do not look quite how one expects. Some parts are rough, others flat. Some edges seem broken, others clean. The light catches a plane of stone and it looks almost vertical, almost measured. The explorer descends another meter, then another. Above, the opening shrinks. Below, the darkness holds its shape. At some point, the question stops being an idea and becomes physical. Why does this place look like this? That question is enough. It does not need a dramatic answer yet. A real mystery can begin with a modest sentence. This does not look ordinary. From there, everything depends on careful attention. Perhaps the smooth walls are fault surfaces. Perhaps the blocks are natural jointing. Perhaps the shaft was enlarged by humans. Perhaps it connects to something else. Perhaps old stories grew around it because the opening was dangerous, strange, and close to a community that had long learned to respect the mountain. Perhaps all these things are true in different proportions. The Earth is under no obligation to choose one simple explanation for our convenience. Khara-Hora may never become a neat story. It may resist closure because it was formed by a complicated sequence of events, some geological, some human, some remembered poorly, some not remembered at all. A crack opens in the mountain. Water moves through it. Rock shifts. People discover it. Perhaps they use it. Perhaps later generations forget. A landslide reveals it again. Explorers descend. Modern viewers interpret photographs. Rumours attach. The mystery grows. That kind of layered history is common on Earth. Places are not made once. They are made again and again by natural forces, human use, abandonment, rediscovery, and storytelling. And as we move deeper into the details, the most important thing to keep is that gentle double vision. We can look at Khara-Hora as a possible natural formation and as a possible human-altered space without forcing either view too early. We can recognise that smooth walls may belong to faults, while also admitting that straight surfaces underground deserve examination. We can smile at the more extravagant claims, while still respecting the basic curiosity that brought people into the shaft in the first place. The cave does not behave like a cave because it sits in the overlap between geology and imagination, between measured stone and human suspicion, between what the mountain did by itself and what someone long ago may have done after finding it. That overlap is where the next part of the story waits, because once people began describing the walls, the blocks, and the strange geometry below, Khara-Hora stopped being only a dark opening in the mountain. It became a possible structure, and structures ask different questions than caves do. They ask about tools, builders, measurements, purposes, and the quiet marks left behind when hands have worked against stone. The first thing that makes Khara-Hora difficult to understand is not the darkness, or the depth, or even the danger of lowering oneself into a narrow opening in a mountain. It is the shape. Darkness is expected underground. Depth is expected in a shaft. Danger is part of the usual bargain whenever the earth opens vertically and gravity is suddenly very interested in your decisions. But shape is different. Shape speaks to the mind before the mind has finished being cautious. A rough cave wall says nature was here for a long time. A smooth wall says perhaps something else. A fallen rock pile says collapse. A line of block-like stone says perhaps arrangement. A crack says pressure. A corner says perhaps intention. And at Khara-Hora, it is this repeated little perhaps that has kept the story alive. When people describe the underground space, they return again and again to its walls. They speak of flatness. They speak of surfaces that descend in a way that feels less like a wild cave and more like a shaft with sides. They speak of stone planes that seem too even for comfort, and of narrow passages whose edges make the eye search for measurement. None of this is enough by itself to prove that ancient builders carved or assembled anything inside the mountain, but it is enough to create that first strange feeling every mystery needs, the feeling that something in front of you is not behaving the way it should. A cave wall is usually expected to wander. It curves, bulges, breaks, and folds. It records water in slow channels, mineral growth in soft skins, and collapses in jagged scars. The most familiar caves, especially limestone caves, often have a kind of melted quality, as if the stone was once thick wax, and time patiently shaped it with invisible fingers. Khara-Hora, in the reports that made it famous, seems to offer a different impression. Its walls are not described as dripping curtains or rounded caverns, but as vertical surfaces, faces of rock that appear unnervingly controlled. It is the difference between entering a hollow tree and entering a stone-lined well. Both can be natural, but one feels far more like a built thing. That word smooth needs careful handling. Smooth compared to what? Smooth like polished marble, smooth like a quarry face, smooth like a fault surface, smooth like an old wall seen under a weak flashlight after the eyes have adjusted to darkness and the body is already a little tense. These are not small questions. Underground descriptions are often born in difficult conditions. A headlamp throws a narrow cone of light. Shadows exaggerate edges. Moisture can make stone shine. Dust can soften roughness. Fear can sharpen attention. Excitement can do the same. A person dangling in a shaft may see a clean vertical plane and feel in the body before the intellect that nature is not usually this neat. But the earth has many ways of being neat when it wants to be. Faults, for example, can create smooth surfaces underground. When rock masses grind past each other under tremendous pressure, the contact surfaces can become polished, scratched and flattened. These surfaces can look strangely deliberate, almost as though some massive tool has passed along them. In a way, one has, The tool was the mountain itself, moving slowly against itself with a weight no human machine could easily imitate. The marks left behind may be straight, clean, and surprisingly regular. So when we hear that Khara-Hora has smooth walls, the first responsible answer is not yes, ancient builders. It is also not no, impossible. It is, what kind of smoothness? What marks are on the surface? What rock is it? What direction do the plains follow? Do they match regional fractures? Are there striations from tectonic movement? Are there chisel marks? Are there tool grooves? Are there repeated patterns that only human work would explain? This is where the mystery becomes less dramatic but more interesting. The difference between nature and ancient engineering may be hidden in details smaller than the first impression. A wall can look flat from a distance, yet under close examination reveal natural mineral slicks and fracture lines. Another wall can look rough in poor light, yet carry tiny tool marks under dust and mineral film. Archaeology often depends on this patient shift from wonder to evidence. The eye sees a shape. The hand tests the surface. The measuring tool records the angle. The microscope looks for marks too fine for the first explorer to notice. The story may begin with awe, but it only matures through method. The stone blocks of Khara-Hora are just as tricky. In some accounts, lower parts of the shaft or chamber contain block-like forms that give the impression of megalithic masonry. That phrase alone can send the imagination down a very long staircase. Megalithic masonry brings to mind ancient walls, fitted stones, lost builders, and engineering that seems too ambitious for the people we imagine living in remote prehistory. Large blocks underground feel even more impressive because the question becomes not only who cut them, but how they moved them, why they placed them, and why they did all this inside a mountain where daylight could not help them. But again, rock can break into blocks without asking permission from archaeologists. Many kinds of stone fracture along natural plains. Volcanic rocks, sedimentary layers, and heavily jointed formations can split into rectangular or polygonal chunks. A cliff face can look like a wall. A collapsed chamber can look like a room filled with fallen building stones. A natural joint system can produce shapes that seem almost tiled. The Giant's Causeway, with its basalt columns, looks like an ancient road built by someone with a fondness for geometry. Fingal's Cave looks like a cathedral, where the architect forgot to invite humans. Nature is fully capable of making people feel briefly unnecessary. Still, the human suspicion is not foolish. People have built with stone for a very long time, and they have done it in places just as difficult and strange as the mountains of the Caucasus. Ancient communities carved tombs into rock, cut chambers underground, opened mines with stone and bone tools, built ventilation shafts, sealed passages, and used natural caves as foundations for sacred and practical spaces. If a natural opening already existed at Khara-Hora, it is not unreasonable to ask whether people could have adapted it. A natural shaft could be widened, a chamber could be cleared, a wall could be faced with stone, loose blocks could be arranged to support, seal, or divide space. Human modification does not require the entire shaft to be artificial. Sometimes the most realistic ancient explanation is not that someone built the mountain hollow from scratch, but that someone found a natural wound and turned it into a useful hidden place. That middle possibility is often overlooked because it is less dramatic than the extremes. One side says, completely natural, nothing to see here. The other says, lost prehistoric civilization, hidden machine, evidence that history is wrong. But the Earth and human history are both fond of mixtures. A cave can be natural and sacred. A fracture can be natural and used as a mine. A shaft can be natural and later widened. A chamber can be geological and still contain traces of people. If Khara-Hora has a real secret, it may not be that it was built entirely by unknown engineers. It may be that natural geology and ancient activity overlapped in a way that makes both explanations incomplete by themselves. The geometry underground is what keeps that possibility open. Explorers and commentators have pointed to shapes that seem arranged around vertical and horizontal lines. They speak of passages that appear too narrow and deliberate, walls that seem too flat, edges that suggest corners, and masses of stone that look like blocks rather than random collapse. A geologist might look at these same details and see jointing, bedding planes, tectonic fracturing, or fault polish. An archaeologist might ask for context. Are the stones freestanding or part of the bedrock? Are there gaps filled with sediment? Are the blocks stacked or simply separated by cracks? Do they continue behind the visible surface? Do their edges show working? Are there signs of quarrying nearby? Are there flakes, chips, dust, tools, charcoal, pottery, bones, or footprints sealed in old sediment? These questions may sound small, but they are the difference between an ancient structure and an impressive trick of geology. One of the problems with Khara-Hora is that the public story has often moved faster than this careful work. Images and descriptions can travel far, especially when they contain the right ingredients. A remote mountain, a shaft discovered recently, smooth walls, huge blocks, unexplained geometry, possible ancient builders, wartime rumours, strange deaths, lack of modern investigation. It is almost a perfect recipe for an internet mystery. But photographs alone can be treacherous underground. A single image may flatten depth, hide scale, exaggerate straightness, or make a natural fracture look like fitted masonry. Without a measured plan, a rock description, a scale bar, and multiple angles, the viewer is left filling in gaps. And the human mind is very generous with gaps. It fills them with the most interesting thing available. The stone does not care whether we are excited. That is one of the calming truths of geology. A wall is either worked or it is not. A block is either placed or it is not. A passage is either cut, natural, or modified, whether anyone online argues about it or not. The challenge is that the evidence may be difficult to reach, difficult to preserve, or difficult to interpret. Underground spaces change. Loose stones fall. Visitors disturb sediment. Water carries material away. Mineral films grow over old surfaces. Later collapses can hide earlier human work, and in a shaft like Khara-Hora, where access is dangerous and systematic research appears limited, the physical evidence may remain beyond easy judgment. Let us imagine what a full investigation might do. First, the shaft would be mapped in detail. Not sketched quickly, but measured in 3 dimensions, with every wall, ledge, passage, chamber, fracture, and block recorded. A laser scan could produce a precise digital model, allowing researchers to examine whether the walls are truly flat or only appear flat from certain viewpoints. The orientation of the wall planes could be compared with known fracture systems in the mountain. If the planes match regional geology, that would support a natural origin. If they cut across geological structure in ways that suggest deliberate shaping, that would raise new questions. Then the surfaces would need close inspection. Natural fault surfaces often carry scratches and polish that follow movement direction. Tool marks, if present, may have different spacing, rhythm, and form. Ancient stoneworking can leave percussion scars, grooves, pecking marks, or repeated cutting traces, depending on the tools used. The difference can be subtle, especially if surfaces have weathered or been coated by minerals, but subtle is not the same as invisible. With enough careful examination, stone often speaks more clearly than first impressions suggest. The blocks would need to be studied too. Are they separate stones, or protruding parts of the same bedrock? Do they rest on one another? Is there packing material between them? Are they aligned in courses, or do they follow natural fracture planes? Are their edges broken recently or worn over long periods? If a block were truly placed by humans, one might expect signs of movement, support, voids behind it, or a relationship with the chamber layout. If it is natural, it may continue into the surrounding rock or align with joint systems. This is the kind of quiet detective work that can make or break a mystery, not with a dramatic reveal, but with a patient series of yes, no, maybe, and not enough evidence. Sediment at the bottom of the shaft could be equally important. Sediment is the diary of an underground space. It records what fell in, what washed through, what animals carried, what humans left, and sometimes how long the space has been open. Layers can contain charcoal, pollen, bones, shells, wood fragments, or artifacts. If humans used Khara-Hora, even briefly, they may have left traces. A broken tool, a fire stain, a piece of worked stone, a scrap of organic material. If the shaft was sealed until recent times, the sediment might preserve a sequence that could be dated. If it has been disturbed by collapse, water, or modern explorers, the story becomes harder to read, but not necessarily impossible. The geometry also raises the question of purpose. A vertical shaft with smooth walls is not only a shape, it is a function waiting for an explanation. If it were artificial or modified, what did it do? A vertical opening could be used for ventilation, especially if connected to lower chambers. Airflow can make underground spaces livable, reduce smoke, and regulate temperature. It could be a well or water access point, though that would depend on hydrology. It could be a mine shaft if materials were extracted from below. It could be defensive, allowing hidden movement or storage. It could be ritual, especially if the descent itself mattered. Or it could have been a natural opening that later acquired symbolic meaning because it looked like an entrance to an underworld, which is a very human reaction to a dark hole in a mountain. The ventilation idea is particularly interesting because it gives a practical reason for a vertical shaft. Ancient underground cities, mines, and shelters often depend on shafts that are not meant as main entrances but as lungs. They move air, release smoke, and connect hidden rooms to the surface without revealing too much. If Khara-Hora were part of a larger underground complex, a vertical shaft might make sense. But that is a large if. To support it, researchers would need to find evidence of connected spaces, airflow patterns, or construction features consistent with ventilation. Otherwise, the idea remains a possibility rather than a conclusion, a door drawn on paper but not yet found in stone. A mine is another practical explanation. Old mines can look mysterious, especially after collapse and erosion. Miners follow veins and fractures, not always in neat tunnels, and their workings may later be mistaken for ritual chambers or lost architecture. The Caucasus has a long history of metal resources and human use of mountain geology. If Khara-Hora were connected to extraction, one might look for tool marks, waste material, mineral targets, smoke stains from lamps, or nearby evidence of processing. But if no such evidence appears, the mining idea weakens. Again, the shape alone cannot carry the whole argument. Then there is the idea of prehistoric engineering. This is the most exciting version, and therefore the one most in need of caution. It imagines that some ancient group, perhaps older than known regional civilizations, created a deep shaft and underground system with advanced understanding of stonework. This idea appeals because it suggests a missing page in human history. It says the past may be deeper, stranger, and more capable than our textbooks have allowed. And to be fair, archaeology has often been surprised by ancient ability. People built earlier, travelled farther, organised more, and observed the sky more carefully than many older scholars once assumed. The past is full of underestimated humans, but underestimated does not mean magical, and unknown does not mean unlimited. A claim of prehistoric megastructure needs evidence strong enough to match its weight. The blocks and walls of Khara-Hora as described are intriguing. They are not yet enough to rewrite anything. That may sound less thrilling, but it is actually what keeps the mystery honest. A real investigation would not begin by asking how a lost civilization built this impossible shaft. It would begin by asking what processes created these surfaces. If natural, which processes? If human, what marks prove it? If both, what came first? The answer might be more interesting than the legend. Imagine discovering that a natural fault shaft was found thousands of years ago, and altered into a hidden refuge, or that ancient people used a naturally geometric cave for rituals because its strange shape already seemed otherworldly, or that the shaft is entirely natural, but so beautifully deceptive that it teaches us something about how mountains create false architecture. Each answer has value. The smooth walls also affect the mood of the place. This may not be scientific evidence, but it is part of the human story. Rough caves feel old in a wild way. Smooth shafts feel intentional in a cold way. They make people quieter. The mind imagines tools, hands, planning, and bodies moving in darkness. It imagines someone standing where the explorer stands now, not with a modern headlamp but with a torch, a stone tool, a rope made from plant fibre or animal hide, and a reason strong enough to descend. It imagines the sound of work echoing upward through the shaft. It imagines dust, sweat, danger, and a purpose now lost. Even if that never happened at Khara-Hora, the shape invites the scene. That is why geometry is powerful. It turns stone into a suggestion. Geometry underground has always carried special weight for human beings. Above ground, straight lines can be roads, walls, fields, or shadows. Underground, straight lines feel less casual. They seem protected from ordinary weather, hidden from ordinary life. When found in darkness, they create the impression of secrecy, as though the mountain has kept a plan folded inside it. This may be why so many underground mysteries become linked to lost knowledge. A surface chamber might be ruined, exposed, and explainable. A hidden shaft feels like storage for something older than memory. It may store nothing at all, but the feeling remains. The danger is that feeling can become evidence if we're not careful. A place feels artificial, therefore it is artificial. A stone looks placed, therefore it was placed. A wall seems smooth, therefore it was cut. That path is easy and satisfying, but it often leads away from truth. The opposite danger is just as real. A claim sounds sensational, therefore the site is worthless. A mystery appears on alternative media, therefore there is nothing to study. That path can also lead away from truth. Many real discoveries begin in messy circumstances. The proper response is not to believe everything or dismiss everything. It is to separate the physical site from the noise around it and ask the stone its questions one by one. Khara-Hora's smooth walls and blocks may one day be explained with satisfying clarity. Perhaps a geological team will document the shaft and show that its walls are fault planes, its blocks are natural fracture masses, and its geometry is a beautiful accident of mountain formation. That would not make the place boring. It would make it a remarkable example of natural architecture. Or perhaps future surveys will find tool marks, altered passages, datable material, or hidden chambers that show humans really did use or modify the shaft in a significant way. That would not automatically prove an unknown supercivilization, but it would open a fascinating new question about who worked there and why. Either way, the answer is not waiting in the most dramatic sentence, it is waiting in the details. For now, the underground geometry remains the central clue and the central trap. It draws the eye, invites theories, and resists easy interpretation. It is the reason Khara-Hora did not remain a simple local cave story. A dark hole can be forgotten, a dangerous shaft can be avoided, but a smooth-walled shaft with block-like stone deep inside a mountain becomes harder to ignore. It touches something very old in the human mind, the suspicion that the earth may contain rooms we did not build, or rooms we built and then somehow lost. And so the descent continues in thought, even when we are safely far from the rope and the stone dust. The lamp moves across the wall. The surface looks flat, then rough, then flat again. A block appears separate, then perhaps connected. A narrow opening suggests a passage, or perhaps only a fracture. Every answer creates another question. The cave behaves like geology, then like architecture, then like geology again. Somewhere in that uneasy rhythm lies the true character of Khara-Hora. Not as a solved monument, and not as a dismissed crack, but as a place where stone seems to hover between accident and intention, waiting for someone patient enough to measure what the darkness has only allowed us to imagine. By the time a person has heard about the smooth walls, the block-like stone, and the strange vertical drop inside Khara-Hora, the mind naturally begins sorting the mystery into possibilities. It wants a shelf to put it on. That is what the mind does when stone becomes confusing. It asks, is this a prehistoric machine, a lost shelter, or simply a natural wound in the mountain? Each answer has its own pull. Each one explains some part of the story and leaves another part still blinking quietly in the dark. And perhaps that is why Khara-Hora remains so difficult to leave alone. It does not offer one clear door. It offers several, and each one opens onto a different version of the past. The prehistoric machine idea is the boldest, and therefore the most delicate. It imagines that the shaft was not merely a cave or a modified crack, but part of some larger system created by people with unusual engineering knowledge. In this version, the vertical opening becomes a component. The smooth walls become designed surfaces. The narrow passages become channels. The chambers below become working spaces, storage spaces, pressure spaces, ventilation spaces, or parts of a mechanism whose purpose we no longer understand. It is a dramatic interpretation, and dramatic interpretations always arrive wearing shiny shoes. They look impressive, they catch the light. But they also need to be asked to show identification at the door. Still, it is not hard to understand why people reach for the machine idea. A vertical shaft inside a mountain does not feel casual, it feels functional. When we see a hole descending into the earth with flat sides, we think of wells, mines, vents, drains, chimneys and shafts used to move air, water, people, or material. We rarely think of nothing. Humans are practical animals. If a space looks as though it could have served a purpose, we instinctively assign one. And the deeper the space goes, the more serious that imagined purpose becomes. Nobody carves into a mountain for decoration alone, unless they are either very determined or have a truly excessive amount of free time. If Khara-Hora had been a prehistoric machine, what kind of machine could it have been? Here we must be careful with the word machine. It does not have to mean gears, metal, engines, and some ancient control room with glowing buttons, though the internet would certainly enjoy that. A machine can be a system that uses shape to manage natural forces. A water channel is a machine. A ventilation shaft is a machine. A grain mill is a machine. A kiln is a machine. A mine with air passages and drainage is a machine. Ancient people built many systems that worked by understanding gravity, airflow, water flow, heat and pressure. They did not need electricity to build something clever. They needed observation, patience, and a reason. So one restrained version of the prehistoric machine theory would say this. Perhaps ancient people found a natural shaft in the mountain and turned it into part of a practical underground system. Maybe it helped ventilate deeper chambers. Maybe it drained water away from spaces below. Maybe it provided access to minerals. Maybe it was used to regulate temperature in a shelter. Maybe it formed part of a hidden storage system where cool underground air preserved food or goods. None of these ideas require impossible technology. They require only that people recognized a useful natural feature and adapted it. That is something humans have done in landscapes across the world. The ventilation idea comes up often in underground mysteries because air is the invisible problem in every enclosed space. If people lived, worked, or hid underground, they needed a way to breathe. They also needed to manage smoke if they used fire. A vertical shaft can create airflow, especially when temperature differences between the surface and underground spaces begin moving air naturally. Warm air rises, cool air sinks. Pressure changes can pull air through cracks and openings. A cleverly placed shaft can make a buried space safer and more livable. Ancient underground cities, especially those in Cappadocia, show how important ventilation could be. Some of their shafts are deep, carefully arranged and not always obvious from the surface. That does not mean Khara-Hora is the same kind of place, but it shows that the general concept is not unreasonable. Water is another possibility. Mountains store and move water in complicated ways. Springs emerge where rock layers guide groundwater toward the surface. Caves can carry seasonal flow. Shafts can drain water, collect water, or provide access to it. If Khara-Hora was connected to water, then its vertical form could have had a practical purpose, but this would need evidence. Mineral deposits, erosion patterns, sediment layers, channels, damp zones, or old watermarks could help tell that story. Without them, water remains a possible actor, but not yet the main character. A mine is also worth considering. Ancient mining often followed natural fractures because those fractures sometimes carried mineral veins. A natural crack could become a working passage. Over time, collapsing rock, mineral coatings, and later weathering could disguise the original activity. A mine might have smooth areas, narrow routes, and blocky debris. It could also explain why people would take risks underground. Minerals have always pulled humans into difficult places. Copper, iron, gold, salt, pigments, and other materials have shaped settlement and trade for thousands of years. The Caucasus is a region with deep traditions of metalworking and mountain resource use, so a mining interpretation cannot simply be brushed aside. But again, the site would need the right clues. Waste rock, tool marks, extraction faces, mineral targets, traces of lamps or fires. Without such evidence, the mine idea remains a sensible question rather than an answer. Then there is the more extravagant version of the prehistoric machine theory. The one that imagines Khara-Hora as evidence of a lost civilization far older and more advanced than accepted history suggests. This version is popular because it gives the mystery a grand scale. It suggests that the smooth walls and stone blocks are not isolated oddities, but fragments of a forgotten engineering tradition. It asks whether prehistoric people in the Caucasus could have built deep stone systems before known civilizations rose elsewhere. It asks whether some great disaster erased their memory, leaving only underground traces. It asks whether the past is not merely incomplete, but badly misunderstood. There is a reason this idea appeals to so many people. Modern archaeology has repeatedly shown that ancient humans were more capable than earlier generations assumed. Sites once thought impossible turned out to be real. Older dates pushed back the timeline of complex behaviour. Hunter-gatherer communities built monumental spaces. Neolithic people moved massive stones, tracked celestial cycles, carved symbolic landscapes, and organised labour in ways that still surprise us. So the general instinct that we should not underestimate ancient people is a good one. But there is a difference between respecting ancient ability and giving every strange stone surface to an unknown super-civilization. The first is humility. The second can become a shortcut. Khara-Hora may be strange, but strangeness is not the same as evidence. A prehistoric machine would require clear signs of design. Repeated features, functional relationships, tool marks, construction patterns, datable human traces, evidence that the shape was made for a purpose and not merely interpreted as purposeful after the fact. Without those things, the machine idea remains an interesting possibility, but it cannot carry the weight of certainty. It is like hearing a noise in another room at night. It might be the house settling, it might be the cat, it might be an ancient civilization trying to get your attention, though statistically speaking the cat has better odds. The lost shelter theory is quieter, but in many ways more grounded. Human beings have used caves and underground spaces for protection for as long as we have been human. A cave can shelter people from weather, animals, enemies, heat, cold, and visibility. In mountainous regions, hidden spaces can be especially valuable. They can store food, tools, and valuables. They can hide families during conflict. They can serve as temporary refuges for hunters, travellers, or communities under threat. If Khara-Hora was known in the deep past, even as a natural shaft, people may have used parts of it without building the whole thing. A lost shelter does not need to look like a house. It may not have neat rooms, smooth floors, or comfortable corners. It may be a hard, dangerous, awkward space that was useful only because the world outside was worse. When we imagine shelter, we often picture warmth and safety. But many ancient shelters were simply places where wind could not reach, where a fire could be hidden, where stored goods stayed cool, or where enemies would not easily follow. Underground shelter is not about comfort first, it is about survival. If people used Khara-Hora as a shelter, what might they have left behind? This is where the evidence would matter again. A shelter should, in many cases, leave traces of occupation. Charcoal from fires, soot on ceilings, animal bones, stone tools, pottery, food remains, bedding materials, footwear impressions in old sediment if conditions were kind, scratches, carvings, or small arrangements of stones. But deep vertical shafts are not ideal living spaces unless there are accessible chambers below, and if the entrance required rope, regular use would have been difficult. That does not make shelter impossible, but it makes the details important. Was there once an easier entrance now blocked? Did the shaft connect to horizontal passages? Was the current opening only a later break into a larger system? These questions could change the entire meaning of the site. There is also the possibility of a refuge used in later periods, rather than deep prehistory. The Caucasus has seen migrations, raids, wars, and periods of instability. Caves and mountain hollows can be reused many times across thousands of years. A place may be prehistoric in origin, then used in the Bronze Age, then forgotten, then used again by shepherds, fugitives, soldiers, or treasure hunters. When a site has a long life, its meaning becomes layered. One group may see shelter, another may see a sacred place, another may see a mine, another may see a dangerous hole best avoided. By the time modern explorers arrive, the original purpose may be buried under later use, natural damage, and stories. The shelter theory also connects with the emotional character of the shaft. Underground spaces often feel protective and threatening at the same time. They hide you, but they also trap you. They quiet the outside world, but they amplify every small sound within. A deep chamber can be a safe place if you know it well, and a terrifying place if you do not. Ancient people would have felt that double nature as strongly as we do, perhaps more strongly. A mountain opening could be both a refuge and a boundary, a place entered only in need, or only by certain people, or only for certain acts. That kind of controlled use might leave fewer traces than permanent habitation. Then we come to the third possibility, the natural wound in the mountain. It is the least glamorous explanation, but perhaps the strongest starting point. Khara-Hora lies in a region shaped by mountain-building forces. The Caucasus is geologically restless in the long view, formed by the collision and compression of great crustal blocks. Rock layers are bent, faulted, fractured, uplifted, and eroded. In such terrain, vertical cracks, shafts, cavities, and blocky chambers can form naturally. A landslide can reveal an opening that was hidden before. A fracture can widen over time. Rock can break along flat plains. Fault movement can polish surfaces. Collapse can create a lower chamber full of angular blocks. The mountain may not have been carved. It may have torn. Calling it a wound is not just a dramatic image. It is a useful way to think about geological formation. A fault is a break. A fracture is a split. A collapse is a failure of support. A shaft may be the visible part of a long injury inside the rock. Mountains look solid from a distance, but inside they can be full of stress, cracks, voids, and weaknesses. They are not dead objects. They are slow structures under pressure. Over time they open, shift, drain, and fall inward. A natural shaft can therefore look purposeful not because it was designed, but because the forces acting on it were directional. Pressure often creates planes, gravity creates verticality, layering creates flatness. Together, these can produce a shape that looks strangely architectural. The natural explanation has several strengths. It does not require unknown builders, missing tools, or an unproven underground civilization. It fits the geological setting. It explains smooth walls through fault surfaces or rock movement. It explains blocks through jointing and collapse. It explains the 2011 reveal through slope movement or erosion. It is the kind of explanation scientists would reasonably test first, because it relies on known processes. And known processes can be powerful enough to make astonishing things. The Earth does not need to be boring to be natural. But the natural explanation also has to do its own work. It cannot simply say nature did it and then go home early. It must explain the specific features. Why are the walls smooth? What rock type is involved? How did the shaft form? Are the block-like stones part of bedrock collapse or something else? Does the geometry match regional fracture patterns? Are there any features that do not fit natural formation? Good skepticism is not dismissal. It is careful testing. If the shaft is natural, proper geological study should be able to show how. That would be a satisfying answer, not a disappointing one. Perhaps the most realistic approach is to allow for a combination. Khara-Hora could be a natural wound that attracted human attention. A fracture opened in the mountain. Ancient or later people found it. They may have explored it, used it, altered a small part of it, marked it, feared it, or built stories around it. Later, a landslide or collapse exposed another entrance, and modern explorers saw the mixture without knowing the sequence. This is often how real sites work. Nature makes a place, humans give it use. Time damages both. Later generations find the remains and argue over which part came first. This combined view also explains why the site can feel both natural and artificial. One section may be pure geology, another may have been cleared or shaped. One wall may be a fault plane, another stone arrangement may be the result of human stacking. A narrow passage may follow a natural crack but show signs of widening. A chamber may be formed by collapse but used for storage or ritual. The problem is that once we ask for a single label, cave or structure, natural or artificial, we may be asking the wrong question. The better question might be, what processes, natural and human, shaped this place over time? The prehistoric machine, lost shelter, and natural wound theories are therefore not equal in evidence, but they are all useful as ways of asking different questions. The machine theory asks about function. Did the geometry serve a purpose? The shelter theory asks about human use. Did people enter, hide, live, store, or gather there? The natural wound theory asks about formation. What did the mountain do by itself? A proper study would not choose one theory at the beginning. It would let each theory make predictions. A machine should show design relationships. A shelter should show occupation traces. A natural fracture should match geological processes. Then the evidence could begin sorting the ideas more honestly than imagination can. For a slow night like this, it is worth noticing how each possibility changes the feeling of the shaft. If it was a machine, then the mountain becomes a hidden artifact, and the shaft becomes a surviving part of a lost technology. If it was a shelter, then it becomes a human place, perhaps cold and difficult, but touched by fear, planning, and survival. If it was a natural wound, then it becomes an example of the Earth's own strange architecture, a reminder that mountains can create forms that look almost intentional without ever needing a hand. Each version is compelling in a different way. None is empty. The temptation is to want the most dramatic version to be true. A prehistoric machine hidden in the North Caucasus is more thrilling than a fracture system. It suggests secrets, lost knowledge, and a past larger than expected. But there is a quieter wonder in the natural version too. Imagine the mountains slowly tearing open over thousands or millions of years, pressure smoothing the walls, stone splitting into blocks, a hidden void waiting unseen until a modern collapse revealed it. That is not boring. That is the planet doing deep work in silence. And if humans later found that natural opening and used it, then the story becomes even richer because it shows the partnership between landscape and human need. This is one of the reasons Khara-Hora remains so useful as a mystery. It teaches us not only about one shaft, but about how we approach the unknown. Some people rush toward lost civilizations because they feel history has become too ordinary. Others rush toward natural explanations because they fear being fooled. But the better path is slower. It lets the mystery breathe. It says that ancient people were capable, nature is powerful, and first impressions underground can be misleading. It does not flatten the story into either fantasy or dismissal. It keeps the lamp steady. There is also something deeply human about the way the three theories reflect three human instincts. The machine theory reflects our instinct to see intelligence and purpose. We look at shapes and imagine minds behind them. The shelter theory reflects our instinct to think of survival. We ask where people hid, how they endured, what they feared, and how they used the land. The natural wound theory reflects our instinct to understand the earth itself, to see mountains not as scenery, but as active systems with histories older than any civilization. Khara-Hora sits at the crossing of these instincts. That is why it feels larger than its measurements. And still, the shaft waits for evidence. It does not become a machine because we admire it. It does not become a shelter because we can imagine frightened people there. It does not become natural simply because geology is the simplest explanation. The truth is not decided by which story feels best beside a cup of tea at midnight. Though, to be fair, tea does improve many discussions. The truth will depend on stone surfaces, sediment, mapping, samples, context, and careful comparison with known natural and human-made sites. Until then, Khara-Hora remains a question shaped like a shaft, so we can hold the three possibilities gently. Perhaps the mountain opened by itself, creating a smooth-walled vertical wound that later humans noticed. Perhaps those humans changed it, used it, or feared it, leaving traces not yet properly studied. Perhaps the geometry points to some practical underground system that has not been fully mapped. Or perhaps the whole thing is a powerful lesson in how nature can imitate design so well that even experienced observers pause. Whatever the answer, the mystery does not weaken when we allow doubt into it. It becomes more durable. A mystery that can survive careful questions is always more interesting than one that survives only by avoiding them. And as the story moves outward from the shaft itself, another layer begins to gather around the mountain. Because Khara-Hora is not only discussed as a geological or prehistoric puzzle, it also sits in a region crossed by armies, legends, and modern myths. The same North Caucasus that holds the strange underground opening also holds memories of the Second World War, when Nazi forces pushed into the mountains and looked toward the Caucasus not only as territory, but as a place loaded with symbols, origins, and old obsessions. That history does not explain the shaft by itself, but it adds a darker shadow to the questions already waiting underground. The shadow of the Second World War does not explain Khara-Hora by itself, but it does change the mood around it. A strange shaft in a mountain is already enough to make people curious. Place that shaft in the North Caucasus, a region where armies once pushed through valleys, where oil fields and high passes became matters of life and death, where symbols, legends, and strategy became tangled together, and the mystery begins to gather a darker outline. The stone is still stone. The shaft is still a shaft. But history has a way of standing behind places, even when it does not speak very loudly. The Caucasus was not just a remote mountain region during the war. It was a prize, a barrier, and a route. To understand why Nazi shadows later became attached to places like Khara-Hora, we need to remember what the Caucasus meant in the early 1940s. It was a land of high peaks, deep gorges, difficult passes, and most importantly for the German war machine, access to oil. The oil fields around the Caucasus and beyond were of enormous strategic importance. Armies do not move on ambition alone. They need fuel, supply lines, roads, railways, and control over terrain. So when German forces drove southward in 1942, the mountains were not simply scenery. They were part of a vast military gamble. This campaign, often connected with the German push toward the Caucasus, brought troops into a landscape that must have seemed both magnificent and hostile. Imagine soldiers moving beneath peaks that rose like walls of another world. Imagine roads curling through narrow valleys, bridges watched carefully, villages caught between fear and uncertainty, and mountains that turned every movement into a challenge. The North Caucasus is not a place that gives itself easily to invading armies. Weather can close routes, snow can swallow paths, fog can hide slopes. Local knowledge matters. A map may show a line through the mountains, but a map does not always tell you what it feels like to drag men, machines, supplies, and weapons through terrain that has its own opinion about outsiders. The German military interest in the region was therefore very practical at first: oil, territory, position, and prestige. But with Nazi Germany, practical aims were often wrapped in strange ideology. The regime was not only a military and political machine, it was also obsessed with race myths, ancient origins, symbols, and the idea that history could be bent into propaganda. Certain Nazi institutions and thinkers became fascinated with old cultures, sacred landscapes, mountain myths, and supposed ancestral homelands. They searched for signs that could support their distorted worldview. They treated archaeology not as a careful study of human life, but as a tool for myth-making. In that atmosphere, a region like the Caucasus could become more than a strategic target. It could become a symbolic landscape. This is where the story begins to brush against Khara-Hora, though we should be careful with every step. There is no need to pretend that every strange cave in the Caucasus was secretly studied by Nazi occult teams. That is the kind of claim that grows very quickly in the dark and does not always enjoy being asked for evidence. But it is true that Nazi forces reached parts of the Caucasus, and it is true that the regime had a documented appetite for mythic history, ancient symbols, and origin stories. It is also true that local wartime memories can attach themselves to unusual places. A mountain cave, a hidden shaft, a symbol carved on stone, or a rumour of a secret search can easily become part of a larger story once war has passed through the land. One of the most famous moments from the German advance into the Caucasus was the ascent of Mount Elbrus by German mountain troops, who planted flags near its summit. Militarily, the gesture did little compared with the brutal realities of supply, combat, and fuel. Symbolically, it mattered. Elbrus is the highest mountain in Europe by many definitions, and placing a flag there was an act of spectacle. It showed how strongly mountains could become stages for propaganda. Peaks were not just terrain, they were trophies. The mountain landscape was being used to tell a story of conquest, power, and destiny, even as the actual campaign became increasingly difficult and dangerous. Once we understand that, it becomes easier to see why later stories about Nazi interest in hidden Caucasus sites would take root. The mountains already had military importance. They already had symbolic value. Nazi ideology already had a taste for ancient mysteries and invented lineages. So when a mysterious shaft like Khara-Hora is discussed today, and when people mention wartime activity nearby, the connection feels almost natural to the imagination. Not proven, perhaps. Not simple, but emotionally easy to understand. A hidden stone opening in a mountain seems like exactly the sort of place a regime obsessed with power and myth might have noticed, or wanted to notice. The danger is that this atmosphere can outrun the facts. History is full enough without needing decoration. The Nazi occupation and military movement through parts of the Caucasus were real. The suffering caused by the war was real. The strategic hunger for oil was real. The ideological misuse of archaeology and ancient history was real. But specific claims about secret searches at Khara-Hora, hidden expeditions into the shaft, or wartime discoveries inside the mountain need evidence before they can be treated as more than stories. It is possible that German troops passed through nearby areas. It is possible that local caves, shelters, and mountain openings were noticed for military reasons. Soldiers notice caves because caves can hide people, store supplies, shelter patrols, or serve as observation points. But that is very different from proving a special investigation of a prehistoric megastructure. Even so, wartime presence can leave a powerful residue. A village that saw soldiers pass through may remember odd details long after official documents remain silent. Someone may recall strangers asking about a mountain path. Someone may remember equipment being carried into the hills. Someone may have heard that old symbols interested the invaders. Over decades, memory and rumour can braid together. One generation says German soldiers came to the area. Another says they were searching for something. Another adds that they knew about an underground entrance. By the time the story reaches modern listeners, the mountain seems wrapped in a secret operation, though the original memory may have been far simpler. This does not mean such stories should be mocked. Oral memory can preserve real events that documents miss. Local people often know things that official histories ignore. But memory is not a photograph. It changes shape as it travels. It is affected by fear, pride, grief, silence, and the human need to make sense of difficult years. The Second World War was not an ordinary event that people filed neatly away. It tore through families and landscapes. It left gaps. And where history leaves gaps, stories often grow, not because people are lying, but because the mind tries to mend what was broken. In the Khara-Hora story, the Nazi shadow usually appears in connection with several ideas. One is the idea that German forces were interested in unusual mountain sites in the Caucasus. Another is the idea that strange symbols were found in the region, perhaps suggesting older traditions or wartime marks. Another is the suggestion that the shaft was known before its modern discovery, possibly to people who moved through the area during the war. These ideas may be linked in public retellings, but each needs its own careful treatment. A symbol on stone may be ancient, modern, natural, local, military, or misunderstood. A wartime visit to a mountain area may have been strategic, not mystical. A cave known by locals may become newly mysterious when outsiders connect it to a larger theory. The trouble with Nazi-related mystery stories is that they attract sensationalism very easily. The regime's real crimes and real ideological obsessions are terrible enough, but popular culture often adds secret vaults, lost relics, occult laboratories, and hidden maps beneath every hill. This can make for dramatic storytelling, but it can also blur the real human history of the war. The Caucasus did not need invented drama. It had real hardship, real fighting, real occupation, real fear, and real strategic importance. If we place Khara-Hora within that wartime setting, we should do so gently, not as a theatrical flourish, but as a reminder that the mountains were once watched, crossed, and contested by people whose reasons were often grimly practical. There is one practical reason caves and shafts might have mattered during the war. Mountain warfare turns every hollow into potential cover. A cave can hide a small group. A shaft can store supplies. A tunnel can conceal movement. A rock shelter can protect against weather or observation. Soldiers, partisans, scouts, and local villagers may all use underground spaces differently. In such a landscape, even a natural cave can become historically important without needing to be ancient or mysterious. If Khara-Hora or nearby openings were known during wartime, they may have been considered simply as useful terrain. That alone could attach war memory to the place, but the symbolic layer remains harder to ignore. Nazi ideology had an unhealthy fascination with origins, purity, ancient power, and the idea of sacred geography. Some within the regime supported expeditions and research intended to prove imagined racial histories. They searched in places from Europe to Asia for symbols and myths that could be twisted into political meaning. The Caucasus, with its diversity of peoples, ancient roots, high mountains and deep cultural history could easily be pulled into those fantasies. For someone looking through that distorted lens, a mountain shaft or unusual symbol might seem like a clue, not because it truly was one, but because ideology teaches people to find what they already want. This is one of the colder lessons of the Khara-Hora connection. A place can be mysterious in itself, and then become more mysterious because dangerous people once had dangerous ideas about history. The shaft may have nothing to do with Nazi activity. It may be natural. It may be older than the war by millions of years if formed by geology, or thousands if used by ancient people. But because the war touched the region, and because the Nazi imagination touched mountains, myths, and ancient origins, later storytellers see a thread. Whether that thread is strong or fragile is another matter, but it is there in the atmosphere. The North Caucasus also has its own deep symbolic world, long predating the war. Local traditions, legends of heroes, sacred places, mountain spirits, burial customs, and ancient roots give the landscape meaning from within, not from the outside. Any wartime interest by outsiders would have entered a region already rich with memory. This matters because when modern people discuss Nazi shadows in the Caucasus, they sometimes accidentally make the outsiders seem like the centre of the story. They were not. The mountains belong to the people who lived there long before the war and long after it. Their stories, fears, and knowledge matter more than the fantasies of invaders. If Khara-Hora became linked to wartime rumours, those rumours may say as much about the 20th century as about the ancient past. The war made hidden places feel dangerous. It taught people that strangers might come looking for maps, shelters, resources, or secrets. It made mountains into military objects. After such a period, a strange shaft is no longer just a geological feature. It can feel like a place someone might have wanted, searched for, or tried to hide. That feeling can survive even if documentation does not. There are also reports and claims around Khara-Hora that speak of strange markings or symbols in the wider area. Symbols are among the most tempting forms of evidence because they seem to promise language. A mark on stone feels like someone trying to speak. But symbols are also among the easiest things to misread. A carved sign may be ancient, it may be recent. It may be a shepherd's mark, a boundary sign, a religious symbol, a military mark, a natural scratch, or a modern addition made by someone who knew exactly how people would react. Without context, a symbol is like a word torn from a page. It may be meaningful, but we do not yet know the sentence. In stories that connect Khara-Hora to Nazi interest, symbols can become especially charged. A mark that might otherwise be studied calmly becomes a possible sign of secret research, ancient knowledge, or wartime obsession. That does not make it false, but it does mean the evidence needs even more care. A proper study would ask where the marks are, what tool made them, whether they weathered over long periods, whether they match local traditions, whether they resemble wartime symbols, and whether they are connected physically to the shaft or merely near it. Near is a slippery word in mountain mysteries. A symbol found in the region does not automatically explain an underground structure. The landscape is large, and human imagination is excellent at drawing lines across it. The lack of modern investigation makes all of this more difficult. If Khara-Hora had been thoroughly mapped, dated, sampled, and published, the Nazi-related claims might either gain support or fall away. Without that, they remain in the uncertain outer ring of the mystery. They are part of the story people tell around the shaft, but not necessarily part of the shaft's origin. This distinction is important. A place can have a geological history, an ancient human history, a wartime history, and a modern media history. These layers can overlap without being the same layer. Think of the mountain as a thick book. The earliest pages may be geological, written in pressure, fracture, uplift, and erosion. Later pages may include human use, if people entered, altered, or remembered the shaft. The wartime pages come much later, dark and violent, involving armies, movement, fear, and perhaps rumour. Then the modern pages begin in 2011, when the opening drew new attention and the old mountain entered the digital age. The mistake would be to tear one page out and claim it explains the whole book. The better way is to read slowly, even when the handwriting changes. The Nazi shadow also affects how audiences respond to Khara-Hora. A natural cave may interest geologists. A possible ancient structure may interest archaeologists and mystery lovers. But a possible ancient structure in a region once touched by Nazi expeditions or military obsession becomes a more intense story. It has danger, secrecy, ideology, and the suggestion that someone powerful may once have known more than they revealed. This is a powerful narrative, but power is not the same as proof. Sometimes a story feels true because it has the shape of truth we recognize from fiction. Secret searches in mountains feel familiar because we have seen them in books and films. Real history is often more ordinary and more terrible. Men wanted oil, armies wanted routes, propagandists wanted symbols, villagers wanted to survive. That ordinary terror should not be lost beneath the mystery. The Caucasus campaign was not a romantic treasure hunt. It was part of a devastating war. When we speak of Nazi interest in the region, we are speaking of invasion, occupation, and military ambition. Any strange ideological interest came attached to a regime responsible for enormous suffering. The mountains may now seem quiet, but the quiet came after noise. To place Khara-Hora in this context is to feel the contrast between deep time and recent violence. A shaft may have been forming for ages. A village may have known the mountain for generations. Then, suddenly, for a few violent years, the world's machinery of war turned toward the same slopes. There is something unsettling about that. The mountain did not change its nature because armies arrived. It did not become younger or older. It did not explain itself to soldiers any more than it explains itself to explorers. Yet human history passed over it, adding fear to mystery. Perhaps German troops never entered the shaft. Perhaps they never knew it existed. Perhaps local people only later connected the mountain's hidden places with wartime memories. Even so, the war remains part of the region's shadow, and shadows can shape how mysteries are remembered. This is why, in telling the Khara-Hora story, it is useful to separate three things. First, the documented wartime importance of the Caucasus, especially for strategic routes and resources. Second, the broader Nazi fascination with ancient symbols and origins, which created a climate where unusual sites could be interpreted through distorted ideology. Third, the specific claims that Khara-Hora itself was known, studied, or targeted during the war. The first is solid history. The second is part of the regime's wider ideological world. The third is uncertain, and should remain uncertain unless better evidence appears. Keeping those distinctions does not make the story weaker, it makes it cleaner, and a clean mystery can still be very strange. In fact, the uncertainty may be more interesting than a simple conspiracy. If there were a neat file saying that a Nazi team explored Khara-Hora on a certain date, the mystery would move in one direction. Without such certainty, the story becomes about how places gather meanings. A shaft opens. People see strange geometry. The region remembers war. The regime's known obsessions hover nearby. Local symbols and rumours enter the conversation. Modern researchers and storytellers connect the threads. Some threads may be real. Some may be decorative. Some may be knots made by time. The mountain remains patient through all of this. It was there before the war. It was there during the war. It is there now, holding its fractures and chambers without concern for our theories. If soldiers passed nearby, the mountain did not answer them. If explorers later lowered themselves into the shaft, it did not explain more to them than to anyone else. There is a kind of stern fairness in that. The stone does not favour the dramatic version, or the sceptical version. It simply keeps the marks it keeps. And yet, humans cannot help placing stories around stone. We do it because places matter more when they touch our fears. Khara-Hora touches several at once. The fear of the underground, the fear of a forgotten past, the fear that history has missing rooms, the fear of war returning to quiet landscapes, the fear that dangerous people once searched for power in places we still do not understand. Whether these fears point toward facts or only toward our own imagination, they make the shaft feel heavier. So the Nazi shadow around Khara-Hora should be treated as a shadow, not a solid object. It darkens the background. It reminds us that the Caucasus was once a theatre of war and ambition. It helps explain why stories of secret interest and strange searches could gather around a mountain mystery. But it does not, by itself, prove what the shaft is. The walls still need measurement, the blocks still need study, the symbols still need context, the history still needs documents, and the mountain, as always, gives nothing away quickly. As we leave the wartime layer for now, the mystery becomes less about armies and more about traces. Because once symbols, rumours and deaths enter the story, Khara-Hora moves into even more uncertain territory. It becomes not only a question of what the mountain contains, but of what happened to the people who tried to understand it, and why some stories seem to grow darker the closer they move toward the shaft. The symbols around Khara-Hora are difficult to handle because they sit in the foggy space between evidence and atmosphere. A symbol on stone can be one of the most powerful things a person can find near a mystery, because it seems to promise intention. It says, or appears to say, that someone was here. Someone marked this place. Someone wanted to leave a warning, a memory, a boundary, a prayer, a claim, or perhaps simply their name scratched in a moment of boredom. Human beings are very good at reading meaning into marks, and sometimes we are right. A carved sign can open a door into a vanished culture. A pattern can identify a ritual site. A repeated shape can reveal a route, a clan, a burial practice, or a sacred story. But sometimes a mark is only a scratch, a weathered crack, a shepherd's sign, a modern visitor's mischief, or a natural line that happens to look like a message when the light arrives at just the right angle. That is the first thing to remember as we move into the darker layer of the Khara-Hora story. Symbols are seductive. Silence is even more seductive. And deaths connected to a mystery, whether by fact, coincidence, rumour or grief, can make the whole place feel as though it has begun defending itself. This is where calm matters most, because a mystery can be fascinating without becoming a curse. A death can be tragic without becoming evidence of hidden forces. A missing notebook can be frustrating without proving a secret cover-up. And yet, we should not pretend that these details do not affect the way people feel about the shaft. They do. They turned Khara-Hora from a strange mountain opening into something with a heavier human shadow. Some accounts connected to the site speak of markings, symbols, or unusual signs in the wider Khara-Hora and Baksan region. They are often mentioned alongside stories of wartime interest, hidden chambers, and old local legends, which gives them a dramatic glow before they have even been properly examined. A mark near a mysterious shaft does not automatically belong to the shaft. It may have been made centuries later or centuries earlier, or by someone with no connection to the underground space at all. Mountains collect marks, shepherds mark routes, soldiers mark places, travellers scratch initials, religious symbols appear on stones, children carve things because children have always been surprisingly committed to leaving proof that they were bored somewhere, and nature, with its cracks, mineral veins, lichen borders, and weathering patterns, can imitate writing well enough to fool a tired eye. Still, if a mark is genuinely old, and if it can be shown to belong to the same context as an underground feature, it becomes important. It could tell us that people knew the place. It could show that the mountain opening had meaning before modern explorers entered it. It could connect Khara-Hora to local traditions, sacred landscapes, warning signs, or practical routes through the mountains. But the word-if must remain in the room. Without documented location, scale, age, tool analysis, weathering study, and comparison with known local symbols, a mysterious sign remains only a mysterious sign. It is a clue waiting for a case, not a case by itself. This is why symbols often make ancient mysteries more complicated rather than simpler. They invite translation before anyone has proved their writing. They invite stories before anyone has established age. They invite connection before anyone has shown context. A geometric mark can become evidence of a lost civilization in one retelling, a Nazi sign in another, an ancient warning in another, and a modern scratch in the most boring but sometimes most accurate explanation. The stone itself does not correct us. It waits while we argue over it. Around Khara-Hora, this uncertainty is made stronger by the silence that followed the early excitement. The shaft was not discovered, studied, published, and settled in the ordinary way that a well-funded site might be. Instead, it entered public attention through scattered reports, local researchers, television programs, online discussions, and later retellings. Russian cave registry material describes the Arthur Zhemukhov cave at Khara-Hora as a tectogenic cave in igneous effusive rock, with a rectangular well and smooth walls that helped inspire the theory of an artificial origin after its discovery. It also records a mapped length of 133 metres and a depth of 54 metres based on a survey from August 2017. That kind of information is valuable because it brings the site back down from rumour into mapped physical space. It tells us there is a real cave, a real shaft, real measurements, and a recognised geological interpretation. But it also shows why people became curious in the first place. Even the technical description mentions the rectangular shaft and smooth walls. This is the strange balance of Khara-Hora. The geological explanation exists, but the unusual impression also exists. A careful description can say the cave is tectogenic and still admit that its shape inspired artificial origin theories. That is not a contradiction. It is the heart of the matter. The mountain may have produced something that looks artificial enough to unsettle people, or people may have noticed something artificial within a natural formation. Either way, the silence after the discovery allowed imagination to grow into the empty spaces where more research should have been. And then comes Arthur Zhemukhov. In many versions of the story, Arthur Zhemukhov is the human figure most closely tied to the modern discovery and exploration of the shaft. Russian language reports after his death described him as the person who first entered the shaft cave above the village of Zyakovo, and one report states that he opened and first penetrated a 78-metre shaft cave in the upper area of the settlement. Whether later measurements differ, or whether different parts of the cave were being described, the point is clear enough for the public story. Zhemukhov became the man associated with going first into the dark, the one whose name attached itself to the opening, the one who saw enough there to keep returning. There is something powerful about that role. Every mystery seems to need a first witness, someone who crosses the line between the known and the unknown. Before that person enters, the place is only a hole, a rumour, a danger, or a dark mark in the mountain. Afterward, it has an account. It has a voice. Someone can say what the walls looked like, what the air felt like, how deep the drop seemed, where the passage narrowed, where the chamber opened, and whether the stone gave the impression of nature or work. The first witness does not always become a reliable witness in every detail, because excitement and expectation can colour memory. But the first witness gives the mystery its first human shape. Zhemukhov's death in 2015 made that role heavier. Reports from June of that year stated that people in Zyakovo were saying goodbye to him after his tragic death, and regional news described him as a known local historian or researcher connected to the shaft cave story. In more dramatic retellings, his death became part of a pattern. It was no longer only the loss of a man who had explored a dangerous and unusual place. It became a dark punctuation mark in the Khara-Hora mystery. Some accounts claim he had been reporting important findings, or had spoken about discoveries shortly before he died. Some say his notes, diaries, or materials did not survive in a way that would satisfy later researchers. These claims are difficult to verify fully, but they became part of the atmosphere around the site. This is how tragedy changes a mystery. When a researcher dies, the work feels interrupted. The questions they carried feel abandoned in mid-sentence. If their records are incomplete, the silence seems louder. People begin to ask what they knew. What had they seen? What were they about to say? Was the death only a sad accident, or did it mean something more? Most of the time, the answer is ordinary and painful. People die, accidents happen, illness comes, mountains are dangerous, roads are dangerous. Life does not arrange itself neatly around unfinished research, but the human mind does not like unfinished stories. It especially dislikes unfinished stories that end near a dark shaft in a mountain. The deaths of others connected, loosely or directly, to the broader Khara-Hora discussion deepened this feeling. Vadim Chernobrov, founder of the Cosmopoisk organization, is often mentioned in later retellings because he took an interest in unusual phenomena and investigations, including mysteries in Russia and beyond. Some popular accounts say his passing in 2017 from cancer removed another determined investigator from the story. Less careful sources fold his death into a pattern of strange loss around Khara-Hora. Other accounts go further, claiming that additional people connected to the exploration also died unexpectedly. But here, again, the careful path matters. A list of deaths is not evidence of a curse, a conspiracy, or a hidden force. It is evidence that people connected to a story had human lives, human risks, and human endings. To turn every death into proof of a secret may feel dramatic, but it can also be unfair to the people who died. Still, the emotional impact is real. Imagine being a local person hearing that the man who first explored the shaft has died, then hearing that another investigator connected to the mystery has died, then hearing that others who entered or researched the place also met tragic ends. Even if each event has an ordinary explanation, the mind begins to place them in a line. One loss is sorrow, 2 losses become coincidence, 3 losses start to feel like a pattern, even when statistics might tell a more boring story. The mountain becomes not just strange, but watchful. The shaft becomes not just deep, but dangerous in a symbolic way. The silence around the research becomes not just neglect, but suspicion. A travel account discussing the Baksan Gorge and Khara-Hora repeats a local-style version of this darker mood, mentioning that Jemakhov descended into the shaft many times, that he spoke of a mysterious door, and that 2 young emergency workers who had also gone down later died in a car accident. The same account frames this through local mystical language and legends, which makes it important as atmosphere but not as proof. This is exactly the kind of material that must be held gently. It tells us how the story is being remembered and repeated. It does not, by itself, prove that the shaft caused anything, or that the deaths were connected by anything more than chance and storytelling. But it does show that, in the local imagination and in later retellings, Khara-Hora became associated with danger beyond ordinary cave risk. The mention of a mysterious door is especially interesting. A door inside a cave is one of those images that almost writes its own legend. It suggests a boundary, a sealed passage, a place not yet entered. But what does door mean in such a setting? It could mean an actual built barrier. It could mean a blocked crack. It could mean a stone slab. It could mean a narrow passage too dangerous to enter. It could mean a personal interpretation by someone who believed the cave continued beyond a certain point. In underground exploration, the difference between a door and a blockage can be more psychological than architectural. If air comes from behind it, if sound changes near it, if the stone seems arranged, the mind calls it a door because door is the word we use for something that might open. Airflow is another detail that appears in early Russian language descriptions and adds to the mystery. One local article described a flow of fresh air in the shaft and suggested that it seemed to come from the sides rather than from above, even noting that a lighter flame was visibly pushed by moving air near the hall. That does not prove hidden chambers, but it does justify curiosity. Air movement can indicate connections to other cavities, cracks, or pressure differences within a cave system. It can also be produced by natural fracture networks. But for an explorer standing underground, feeling air move from unseen spaces, it would be hard not to imagine that the mountain continues beyond the mapped passages. Air is invisible, but in a cave it feels like a whisper from somewhere else. When symbols, deaths, lost notes, and moving air gather around one site, silence becomes almost a character. People ask why there was not more research. Why did the investigation not continue with the intensity the claims seemed to deserve? Why did the story remain scattered across regional reports, television segments, cave maps, and mystery videos instead of becoming a clearly studied archaeological or geological case? The answer may be less sinister than the questions imply. Research requires funding, access, safety, institutions, and a reason for specialists to invest time. A dangerous cave with sensational claims may actually repel serious researchers if the public conversation becomes too speculative. Political conditions, local priorities, and the ordinary difficulty of mountain fieldwork can all slow things down. Sometimes silence is not a cover-up. Sometimes it is bureaucracy, risk, low funding, and the world's general talent for leaving inconvenient questions unattended. But silence has its own sound. When a story is dramatic and the follow-up is thin, people feel the gap. They wonder why no one went deeper. They wonder why no official team settled it. They wonder why a place that might change history did not become famous in academic journals. The simplest answer may be that most experts did not see enough evidence to justify that claim, or that the geological interpretation seemed adequate, or that access and documentation were poor. Yet for those who believe Khara-Hora is more than natural, the lack of attention feels like part of the mystery. In their view, the silence is not absence, it is a clue. This is where the story becomes a mirror again. Skeptics look at the same silence and see a lack of evidence. Believers see suppression, neglect, or fear. Local storytellers see the mountain keeping its secrets. Cavers see a dangerous system that must be respected. Geologists see a tectonic cave with unusual forms. Mystery lovers see a trail of symbols and deaths. Each group hears the silence differently. The deaths, too, are heard differently. For a family or community, the death of someone like Jemakov is personal. It is not a plot device. It is a real loss. For later audiences encountering the story online, the death becomes part of the mystery structure. This is understandable, but it asks for care. We can say that his death deepened the atmosphere around Khara-Hora. We can say it interrupted the human side of the investigation. We can say that later accounts connected his loss with other tragedies. But we should not turn grief into evidence too quickly. There is a difference between saying a mystery was marked by death and saying the death was caused by the mystery. And yet the emotional link remains. A man descends into a strange shaft many times. He speaks of unusual features. He dies before the story is settled. Other names around the subject fade, pass away, or become difficult to trace. Photographs remain, maps remain, reports remain, the cave remains. But the people who could explain what they saw are fewer. That is enough to make the story feel haunted, even without ghosts. In a calmer light, the symbols and deaths around Khara-Hora may tell us less about hidden forces and more about the fragile nature of knowledge. Discoveries do not preserve themselves. They need notes, archives, institutions, careful publication, and people who can continue the work when the first explorers are gone. If the early records are scattered, if the main witnesses pass away, if the cave is difficult to access, if serious study is limited, then the mystery becomes vulnerable to distortion. Each missing record creates room for a stronger rumour. Each unclear photograph becomes more dramatic with time. Each death makes the unfinished work feel more meaningful. This may be the deepest lesson of the Khara-Hora silence. The unknown is not only created by ancient time, it can be created by modern neglect. A site does not have to be 10,000 years old to become mysterious. It only has to be poorly documented, emotionally charged, and difficult to revisit. Khara-Hora may be a natural tectonic cave, a modified ancient space, or something in between. But the reason it feels so mysterious today is partly because the human record around it is incomplete. The mountain did not only hide the shaft, people failed, for many understandable reasons, to fully capture what was found after the shaft came to light. As we think of the symbols, it is useful to imagine a single mark on stone, a line crossing another line, a shape that might be a letter, a sign, or nothing at all. In daylight, on a museum table, with tools and context, it might be studied calmly. Underground or near a mysterious shaft, after stories of Nazi searches, unexplained doors and dead explorers, the same mark feels charged. It becomes a warning, or a map, or a signature from people who knew the mountain long before us. The mark has not changed. The story around it has. That is how Khara-Hora gathers weight. Not all at once, and not from one fact. It gathers weight from accumulation. A strange shaft, smooth walls, block-like forms, moving air, possible symbols, wartime shadows, a first explorer who dies, other reported losses, missing or scattered records, limited official attention. Each piece alone might be explained. Together, they create a mood that is harder to explain away, even if some parts are weak. This does not prove an ancient civilization. It proves that mysteries are made not only from stone, but from the gaps between stones and from the human stories that fall into them. By now, the shaft has become more than an underground feature. It has become a place where evidence and rumour are difficult to separate cleanly. That does not mean we should give up trying. It means the next step must be even more careful. The symbols need context. The deaths need respect, not exaggeration. The silence needs explanation, not automatic suspicion. And the cave itself needs the kind of modern investigation that can measure walls, sample rock, map passages, study airflow, and look for human traces without beginning from either belief or dismissal. Because somewhere beneath all the stories, the physical place remains. The rectangular well, the smooth surfaces, the dangerous hanging blocks, the narrow cracks, the air moving from unseen directions, the mapped depth, the mountain above Zayukovo, the stone that inspired theories of artificial origin, while also fitting a tectonic explanation, the human losses that made the story darker, but not necessarily clearer. All of it remains there, layered together, and perhaps that is why the mystery still feels unfinished. Not because the mountain is cursed, not because every symbol is a warning, not because every death points to a hidden hand, but because the questions were never fully carried to the end. The people who looked into Khara-Hora saw enough to wonder, but not enough was preserved to settle the wondering. The shaft opened, the stories rose, the silence followed, and in that silence the mountain became larger than itself, waiting for the kind of patient modern study that could finally separate the marks of nature, the marks of humans, and the marks left by fear. The strange thing about Khara-Hora is not only that people disagree about what it is. The strange thing is that, after all the talk, all the claims, all the photographs, all the references to smooth walls, stone blocks, hidden air currents, local stories and wartime shadows, modern science has still not placed the site under the kind of careful, repeated attention that could separate the stronger questions from the weaker ones. It is one thing for a mystery to remain unsolved because the evidence is too difficult, too ancient, or too damaged. It is another for a mystery to remain suspended because the proper work has barely begun, or has begun only in fragments, with no large public study that most people can point to and say, there, that is what the mountain contains. At first, that absence can feel suspicious. A person hears about a deep shaft in the North Caucasus that may look artificial, and the immediate reaction is simple. Why has no major scientific team gone there? Why has it not been scanned, mapped, sampled, dated, photographed in detail and discussed in journals? Why is the story still moving through scattered reports and retellings, rather than through a clear investigation? If the place is natural, why not prove it properly? If the place is artificial, why not study it urgently? If there are symbols nearby, why not analyse them? If there is airflow from hidden spaces, why not trace it? These are fair questions, but the answers are not always as dramatic as the imagination would like. Science, for all its power, is not a magical spotlight that sweeps evenly over the entire planet. It does not automatically rush to every strange stone, every cave, every rumour, or every possible ancient site. Science is done by people, and people need money, time, permission, equipment, safety plans, institutions, travel access, cooperation, and a reason strong enough to make one project rise above thousands of others. The world is full of caves, full of ruins, full of local mysteries, full of stone formations that someone somewhere believes are artificial. A site may be fascinating and still fail to attract the right combination of attention and resources. It is not always ignored because someone wants it hidden. Sometimes it is ignored because the world is busy, funding is limited, and a remote mountain shaft is inconveniently difficult to study. Khara-Hora is inconvenient in several ways. It is underground, which already raises the cost and danger of any investigation. It is vertical, which means ordinary archaeologists cannot simply walk in with notebooks and brushes. It requires caving skills, rope work, safety systems, helmets, lighting, emergency planning, and people who understand unstable rock. A cave can be scientifically interesting and still be a terrible place to bring a large research team. Loose stone can fall, narrow passages can trap equipment, air quality can change, wet surfaces can become dangerous. A single careless step can turn an academic question into a rescue operation. So the first barrier is not mystery, it is gravity, that old and reliable critic of human ambition. Then there is the question of what kind of scientist should study it. If Khara-Hora is natural, it belongs mainly to geologists, geomorphologists, and speleologists. If it is artificial or modified, it belongs also to archaeologists. If it contains symbols, epigraphers, rock art specialists, or local cultural historians may be needed. If there are possible wartime traces, historians and military archaeologists could become relevant. If there is airflow from hidden cavities, cave surveyors and geophysicists may be needed. A proper study would therefore be interdisciplinary, which sounds elegant until one remembers that interdisciplinary work often means several groups trying to coordinate schedules, funding, methods, permissions and opinions, all while standing near a hole in a mountain that may or may not justify the effort. A geologist might say the shaft is a tectonic cave formed by fractures in the rock. That may be a reasonable starting point. If the walls align with known fault planes, if the smoothness comes from rock movement, if the block-like forms are natural jointing, then the site may not appear urgent from a geological perspective. Interesting, yes. Mysterious to the public, certainly, but not necessarily revolutionary. Scientists are often cautious about spending major resources on a place if preliminary interpretation fits known natural processes. From outside, this can look like neglect. From inside the scientific world, it may look like triage. There are only so many field seasons, so many grants, and so many people trained to hang safely in vertical rock openings while arguing about fracture patterns. An archaeologist, on the other hand, might hesitate for a different reason. Archaeology needs context. A possible ancient structure is not enough. There must be signs of human activity that can be studied. Artifacts, layers, charcoal, bones, tools, pottery, worked surfaces, occupation deposits, or construction features. If the public evidence from Khara-Hora consists mostly of unusual shape, smooth walls, and claims of block-like stone, an archaeologist may see an interesting possibility, but not enough to justify declaring it a major ancient site. This is especially true if the site has already become surrounded by sensational claims. Serious researchers often become wary when a place is promoted as proof of a lost, advanced civilization before the basic fieldwork is finished. They do not want to lend their name to a story that may already be running ahead of the evidence. That is one of the quiet tragedies of mysteries like this. Sensational attention can make a site famous, but fame of the wrong kind can make experts step back. If a place is presented too loudly as impossible, forbidden, world-changing, or suppressed, careful researchers may worry that any involvement will be misunderstood. If they say the shaft is natural, believers may accuse them of hiding the truth. If they say it deserves more study, headlines may announce that scientists have confirmed a lost civilization. If they find something modest, the public may be disappointed. So the site remains in a strange middle space, too popular among mystery lovers to be ignored, but not cleanly documented enough to become a stable academic subject. There is also the practical problem of records. To build a serious scientific case, one needs reliable documentation. Where exactly is the feature? What is its full mapped form? What are the measurements? What rock types are present? Who surveyed it? When? What photographs show scale? What samples were taken? What previous reports exist? Are there local archives? Are early accounts preserved? Are claims based on first-hand observation or repeated summaries? Without clear records, a researcher has to spend time simply sorting the story before even approaching the stone. That preliminary work can be exhausting. It is like trying to assemble a puzzle after someone has mixed in pieces from 3 other puzzles and also spilled tea on the picture on the box. Remote mysteries often suffer from this. The first people who enter may not be trained to document everything systematically. They may be explorers, local historians, journalists, or enthusiasts, all valuable in their own way, but not always following scientific protocols. They may take dramatic photographs, but not scale shots. They may describe smooth walls, but not measure wall orientation. They may mention symbols, but not record exact coordinates or weathering. They may speak of airflow, but not monitor it across seasons. None of this means they are careless people. It means discovery and documentation are different skills. The first opens the door. The second patiently measures the hinges. Another reason modern science may have barely touched Khara-Hora is that the site is not easy to classify. A cave registry may list it as a tectonic cave. Mystery writers may call it a megastructure. Local accounts may treat it as a strange and possibly dangerous place. These categories do not naturally bring the same institutions to the table. If it is a cave, it may be considered a speleological feature. If it is an archaeological site, it may require heritage protection. If it is tied to wartime history, it may fall into another domain. If it is promoted as a lost civilization, it may become something scholars avoid until clearer evidence appears. A place that belongs to many categories can end up being fully claimed by none. Politics and geography can also matter. The North Caucasus is a complex region, with its own administrative structures, local priorities, security concerns, and histories of tension. Field research is never just about curiosity. It requires access, permissions, relationships, and trust. Outside teams cannot simply arrive, lower ropes into a mountain, remove samples, and leave with neat conclusions. They must work with local authorities and communities. They must respect the land and the people who live near it. In some regions, logistics alone can slow research for years. Roads, weather, safety, equipment transport, and communication all matter. A cave may be only a few kilometers from a village and still be difficult to study properly if the terrain, permissions, and funding do not align. There is also the issue of risk versus reward. Suppose a university team considers Khara-Hora. What is the scientific payoff? If the shaft turns out to be natural, the result may be a useful geological paper, but perhaps not a career-defining discovery. If it shows slight human modification, that is interesting, but it may still be difficult to date or interpret. If it turns out to be a major artificial underground structure, the payoff would be huge, but the probability may appear low to cautious scholars. Funding bodies tend to prefer projects with clear questions, established methods, and likely publishable outcomes. A site wrapped in dramatic claims but lacking preliminary evidence can be a hard sell. That is not romantic, but it is real. Even mysteries must fill out paperwork. The lack of modern investigation may also come from the uncomfortable relationship between local knowledge and formal science. Local people may know of unusual places, stories, and signs that never enter academic databases. Researchers may dismiss local accounts too quickly if they come wrapped in legend. At the same time, local stories can mix memory, metaphor, and speculation in ways that are difficult to translate into scientific questions. The best work happens when both sides listen carefully. The local account says, there is a place where air comes from the stone. Science asks, where exactly, under what conditions, and how can we measure it? The local account says, this mark is old. Science asks, what kind of mark? What weathering, what tool, what comparison? Neither side has the whole answer alone. Khara-Hora may need that kind of partnership, but such partnerships take time. A proper investigation would begin not with a grand declaration, but with a boring plan. Boring plans are underrated. They are the quiet engines of truth. First, a team would survey the entrance and surrounding slope. They would record the geology of the surface, the rock layers, fracture directions, and evidence of landslides or collapse. Then trained cave surveyors would map the shaft in detail, using laser scanning or photogrammetry where possible. Every wall, surface, block, ledge, crack, and passage would be placed into a three-dimensional model. That model could then be examined by geologists and archaeologists together. Does the geometry follow natural fracture systems? Are the surfaces continuous with bedrock? Do any features cut across geology in ways that suggest human shaping? Next would come close surface analysis. The smooth walls would be studied under magnification. Natural polishing, fault striations, mineral coatings, tool marks, and weathering patterns can tell different stories. Samples might be taken carefully if permitted to identify rock type and mineral alteration. Sediment would be examined layer by layer. If there is undisturbed material, it could be tested for organic remains, pollen, charcoal, bones, or other datable traces. Airflow could be measured over time, not just once with a flame, because cave air changes with temperature, pressure, and season. Geophysical methods might search for hidden voids nearby, though mountain geology can make such work complicated. If symbols exist in the area, they would be documented with scale, lighting, exact location, and specialist comparison. This is what barely touched means in practice. It does not mean no one has ever entered or mapped anything. It means the public story has not been matched by a broad, transparent, multidisciplinary study that answers the major claims in one place. A cave survey may address length and depth. A local article may describe airflow. A researcher may discuss possible artificial features. A skeptic may point to tectonic origins. But the ordinary viewer has no complete scientific file to consult. Instead, the evidence is scattered like stones at the base of a cliff. You can pick them up one at a time, but the wall they came from remains unclear. The modern media environment makes this worse. A mystery with limited data is perfect for dramatic retelling. The gaps become space for music, shadows, and confident narration. A cautious sentence like "this cave may have formed along tectonic fractures" becomes less clickable than "this shaft may prove a lost civilization." A local tragedy becomes unexplained deaths. A smooth wall becomes impossible precision. A lack of research becomes scientific silence. Each transformation may be small, but together they move the story away from the ground. By the time many people encounter Khara-Hora, they are not encountering a cave with unresolved questions. They are encountering a ready-made legend. Once a legend forms, science has to do twice the work. It must study the site, and it must untangle the claims around the site. If scientists conclude the shaft is mostly natural, they may be accused of being closed-minded. If they find human traces, those traces may be exaggerated beyond what they show. If they say more work is needed, That uncertainty may be treated as confirmation of the most exciting theory. This can make researchers cautious in public, especially when the site is not central to their main work. Silence, again, may not mean secrecy. It may mean fatigue. Yet the absence of full investigation should not be used as proof that nothing important is there. Many places remain understudied for ordinary reasons. Archaeology is full of landscapes that received attention only after decades of being overlooked. Caves can preserve astonishing evidence, but they can also be neglected because they are hard to access. Mountain regions can hold ancient routes, shelters, and ritual places that do not fit neatly into famous historical narratives. So while we should not inflate Khara-Hora into a prehistoric megastructure without evidence, we should also avoid the easy comfort of saying, if it were important, science would already know. That is not always true. Science knows what it has had the chance to study well. Khara-Hora may also be suffering from a problem of scale. It is dramatic enough to excite the public, but perhaps not yet documented as large enough to demand major institutional attention. A shaft of tens of meters, a mapped cave length of around 100 meters, and smooth walls may be fascinating, but the word Megashaft can make people imagine something enormous beyond what has been securely shown. If the public image becomes too inflated, the actual site may disappoint experts. They may see a notable cave, not an impossible structure. That gap between name and evidence can discourage serious engagement. A mystery should be allowed to be strange at its true size. Making it bigger than the evidence supports can ironically make it easier to dismiss. Another quiet factor is preservation. If a site is dangerous or fragile, publicizing it too much can harm it. Visitors may enter without proper training. Surfaces may be touched, scratched, or damaged. Sediment may be disturbed. Loose stones may be moved. Symbols, if any are real, may be vandalized or copied. Sometimes researchers avoid drawing attention to sensitive sites until protection is possible. With Khara-Hora, the story is already public, but that does not mean the site is ready for crowds. A hidden place can be loved to death, especially when people arrive looking for proof of an exciting theory. The mountain may be safer when fewer boots enter it. The evidence may be safer too. What would it take for modern science to touch Khara-Hora properly? Not a single heroic explorer, not one dramatic documentary visit, not a quick descent with a camera and a headline. It would take a planned project, local cooperation, speleologists to manage safe access, geologists to explain formation, archaeologists to look for human use, historians to examine wartime claims, specialists in rock markings if symbols are present, transparent publication of maps, photographs, measurements and interpretations. It would take the willingness to let the answer be modest if the evidence is modest. That last part may be the hardest. People want a revelation. Science may offer a fracture system with possible later human use. It may offer a natural cave with no ancient engineering. Or it may offer something unexpected, but only after the slow work is done. There is a peaceful lesson here, though it may not be the one mystery lovers hope for. The fact that modern science has barely touched Khara-Hora does not automatically make the shaft more mysterious in a supernatural or conspiratorial way. It makes it more human. It shows how knowledge depends on fragile chains. Someone must notice. Someone must document. Someone must preserve notes. Someone must fund. Someone must return. Someone must publish. If any link fails, the unknown remains. Not because the truth is impossible, but because the work did not continue far enough. The mountain, meanwhile, has no schedule. It does not care whether a research grant is approved. It does not care whether online viewers are impatient. It does not care whether one person calls it a tectonic cave and another calls it a prehistoric machine. It waits with the calm indifference of stone. Rain falls. Frost enters cracks. Small rocks shift. Air moves through hidden spaces. Villagers pass below. The story circulates above ground, changing shape with each telling. while the shaft keeps its own slow silence beneath the slope. Perhaps this is why the lack of investigation feels so haunting. It is not simply that we do not know, it is that we might be able to know more and yet somehow have not. The tools exist. The methods exist. The questions are clear enough to begin. Is the wall natural or worked? Are the blocks bedrock or placed stone? Is there evidence of human occupation? Does airflow suggest hidden cavities? Are the symbols real, old and connected? Did wartime activity leave any trace? These are not impossible questions. They are difficult questions, but difficulty is the normal weather of science. Until those questions are answered with care, Khara-Hora will remain in the half-light, not fully claimed by archaeology, not fully explained to the public by geology, not fully separated from rumour, not fully protected from exaggeration. It will continue to be a place where the absence of clear research becomes part of the story itself. The silence will continue to invite belief, skepticism, suspicion, and wonder in equal measure. And maybe that is the real reason the shaft stays with people. It represents all the places on Earth that are not famous enough to be studied deeply, not ordinary enough to be forgotten, and not clear enough to be understood from a distance. It reminds us that mystery is not always hidden, because it is ancient. Sometimes mystery is hidden, because no one has yet done the patient work of looking properly. Khara-Hora may be a natural wound, a used shelter, a misunderstood cave, a small part of a larger system, or a mixture of all these things. But until modern science steps carefully down into the stone, measures what is there, and listens without rushing, the mountain will keep the final answer just below the reach of the light. The hidden shaft beneath Khara-Hora may not be keeping a single answer. That is perhaps the most important thing to understand before we try to close the circle around it. Mysteries often tempt us to search for one final key, one buried door, one dramatic explanation that clicks into place and makes every strange detail behave. But the Earth rarely works that neatly, and human history almost never does. A mountain can hold geological fractures, ancient traces, wartime memories, local stories, and modern misunderstandings all at once. It can be natural and meaningful. It can be misread and still important. It can be ordinary in its formation, unusual in its appearance, and powerful in the way people respond to it. Khara-Hora may be keeping not one secret beneath Russia, but several layers of unfinished truth stacked together like stone. The first thing it may be keeping is the simple truth of its own formation. That sounds plain, but it is not. To know how the shaft formed would be to read the mountain's private history. Was it opened by tectonic movement, a crack born from pressure deep in the rock? Was it widened by collapse, water, frost, or the slow pulling force of gravity? Were the smooth walls polished by fault movement, making the stone look cut when it was really ground by the mountain against itself? Are the block-like forms natural parts of a fractured rock body, or did later movement break them into shapes that only resemble construction? These are not small questions. They are the foundation. Before we can say what people may have done there, we need to know what the mountain did first. If the answer is natural, Khara-Hora would still be worth understanding. That may feel surprising because mysteries often train us to be disappointed by natural explanations. But a natural shaft that looks artificial is not a failure of mystery. It is a lesson in how strange the planet can be without our help. The Earth is full of accidental architecture. It raises basalt columns like temple pillars. It cuts canyons like corridors. It polishes fault plains like walls. It stacks fractured rock until a cliff resembles masonry. If Khara-Hora belongs to that family, then the hidden shaft is not less fascinating. It becomes an example of nature producing geometry so convincing that human beings pause and wonder whether another intelligence was involved. That is a rare thing in itself, a place where geology imitates intention closely enough to make us question our first instincts. But the shaft may also be keeping a human layer, and this is where the story becomes more delicate. Perhaps people did not build it from nothing, but found it. That is often how human use of landscape begins. We discover what nature has already prepared. A cave becomes a shelter, a spring becomes sacred, a cliff becomes a lookout, a crack in the stone becomes a hidden passage. If ancient or later people found Khara-Hora, they may have explored it, feared it, widened part of it, cleared debris, marked nearby stone, or used chambers and cracks for purposes we no longer see clearly. Such use might have been brief. It might have left only faint traces. It might not match the grand image of a lost civilization, but it would still matter. A single fire stain, a small tool, a scrap of charcoal, or a shaped surface could turn a geological feature into a human place. That may be one of the most realistic possibilities. Not a completely artificial megastructure, not a meaningless crack, but a natural feature noticed and used by people whose lives were tied to the mountain. The Caucasus has been crossed, inhabited, defended and remembered for thousands of years. People there understood slopes, stone, water, weather and hidden ground. They did not need modern machines to recognize a useful opening. They did not need to belong to a vanished super-civilization to work with rock. Human beings have always been clever where survival required it. If Khara-Hora offered shelter, airflow, storage, ritual significance, or access to something underground, someone may have found a reason to enter. The shaft may also be keeping the memory of fear. Underground places are rarely neutral in human imagination. They pull us in and warn us away at the same time. A deep vertical opening is not a comfortable space. It is a boundary. Above it is daylight, village life, wind, ordinary sound. Below it is darkness, cold air, echo, and the awareness that the mountain is now around you, rather than beneath you. Ancient people may have treated such a place with caution, not because they were superstitious in any simple sense, but because dangerous places deserve stories. A story can protect people. A warning can keep children away. A legend can mark a boundary more effectively than a signpost. If the mountain had an opening that led down into uncertainty, it would not be strange if people attach meaning to it. Maybe that is part of what Khara-Hora still keeps. Not only physical evidence, but old caution. A place that local people avoid can become mysterious because avoidance itself becomes part of its identity. Why do people not go there? Because it is dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because the walls fall, the air is strange, the path is narrow, someone once died, someone once heard something, someone once saw something. Over time, practical warnings and symbolic fear become difficult to separate. That does not make the stories false, it makes them layered. Sometimes a legend is not a fantasy, but a memory wearing a heavier coat. There may also be more of the cave still unknown. Airflow, blocked passages, narrow cracks, and lower chambers all raise the possibility that the mapped shaft is not the full system. Many caves are larger than their first survey suggests. Some passages are too tight to enter safely, some are blocked by collapse, some change with seasons, some connect through cracks that move air but not people. If Khara-Hora has hidden voids beyond the known descent, then the mountain may still be keeping physical space from us, not in a magical way, but in the ordinary stubborn way of underground systems. A cave does not become fully known just because a person entered it once, or even many times. It becomes known when patient mapping, repeated visits, and careful measurement build a complete picture. Khara-Hora has not yet received that kind of public certainty. Of course, hidden space does not automatically mean hidden civilization. This is where the imagination must walk carefully. A blocked passage may lead to another natural cavity. A draft may come from a narrow fracture. A chamber may contain only fallen stone. But even that would be interesting. Underground spaces are records of movement, pressure, water, and time. If there are unseen cavities, they may help explain the shaft's formation. They may show how the mountain breathes. They may reveal whether the vertical well is isolated or part of a wider fracture network, and if, within those spaces, any human traces were found. then the story would change again. The shaft may be keeping evidence that has already been damaged or disturbed. This possibility is less dramatic than a sealed door, but it is often the sad truth at mysterious sites. The first explorers may have moved stones without realizing their importance. Later visitors may have disturbed sediment. Water may have washed away layers. Loose debris may have fallen into older deposits. If there were traces of ancient use, they may be fragile, scattered, or buried under collapse. Evidence is not always waiting patiently in perfect condition for the right scientist to arrive. Sometimes it is fading while the debate continues above it. That is why careful study matters sooner rather than later. The mountain may be patient, but the clues inside it may not be. Khara-Hora may also be keeping a lesson about how modern people create mystery. We often imagine mystery as something buried in the past, but part of this one was built in the present. A discovery in 2011. Scattered reports, unusual photographs, a named explorer, claims of smooth walls and strange stone, wartime associations, rumours of symbols, reports of deaths, lack of complete investigation. Each piece became part of the structure of the story. The shaft itself may be stone, but the mystery around it is human-made, shaped by attention, fear, hope, grief, and the hunger for lost history. That does not make it fake. It makes it alive in the way all famous mysteries are alive. They exist both in the world and in the minds that gather around them. This is why Khara-Hora can be meaningful even if the most dramatic theories are wrong. Suppose future researchers show clearly that the shaft is a natural tectonic cave with smooth walls formed by fault movement and blocks formed by jointing and collapse. Some people would call that disappointing, but it would still reveal something about the mountain and something about us. It would show how natural geometry can fool the eye. It would show how quickly human imagination adds builders to straight lines. It would show how remote landscapes collect stories when evidence is incomplete. It would also remind us that wonder does not require artificiality. A mountain tearing open in such a way that it resembles architecture is already a remarkable thing. On the other hand, suppose future researchers find limited but real human modification. A widened passage, a cleared chamber, tool marks, charcoal, a stone arrangement that cannot be explained naturally. That would not instantly prove an advanced prehistoric civilization, but it would make Khara-Hora a genuine archaeological puzzle. Who used it? When? Why? Was it a shelter, a mine, a ritual place, a storage space, or part of a larger underground tradition in the region? Such a discovery would be quieter than the most dramatic claims, but perhaps stronger because it would rest on evidence instead of desire. It would bring the mystery closer to human hands, which are often more moving than legends of impossible technology. And if something truly unexpected were found, if the shaft did connect to a larger artificial system, if the blocks showed construction, if the walls held ancient tool marks, if datable material pushed human use far back into prehistory, then Khara-Hora would become more than a local mystery. It would become part of a wider conversation about underground building, mountain cultures, and the hidden abilities of ancient communities. Even then, the careful questions would matter. How old? Made by whom? With what tools? For what purpose? Connected to which known cultures? A real discovery does not end questions. It multiplies better ones. The hidden shaft may also be keeping nothing that will satisfy us. That is another possibility, and a strangely honest one. It may contain no lost door, no sealed archive, no ancient machine, no chamber of stone blocks beyond what has already been seen. It may be a dangerous, beautiful, confusing cave whose greatest secret is that it looks like more than it is. Many mysteries end this way, not with a dramatic answer, but with the realization that the unknown was enlarged by distance. Yet even that has value. It teaches patience. It teaches humility. It reminds us that not every strange place is a message, and not every silence is concealment. Sometimes the earth simply forms a shape, and leaves us to struggle with our own expectations. Still, it is hard not to feel that Khara-Hora deserves one more serious look. Not because it must contain a lost civilization, but because the questions around it have become too tangled to leave entirely to rumour. A careful modern survey could honour both wonder and scepticism. It could map the shaft properly, document the walls, study the blocks, measure airflow, examine sediment, and record any symbols or marks in context. It could tell local communities what the evidence shows and what it does not. It could preserve the memory of those who first explored it without turning their deaths into myths, too heavy for the truth to carry. It could give the mountain a clearer voice. And perhaps that is all we can ask of science in a place like this. Not to remove mystery from the world, but to make the mystery more honest. There is a great difference between mystery and confusion. Mystery is what remains after careful looking. Confusion is what grows when no one looks carefully enough. Khara-Hora has lived too long in confusion. The shaft has been called too many things without enough shared evidence. It has been pulled between geology, archaeology, legend, war, tragedy, and speculation. Somewhere beneath those layers is a real place with real walls and real stone, waiting not for belief, but for attention. As we imagine it now, the mountain is quiet again. No dramatic music, no flashlight beam shaking across the wall. No one leaning over the entrance with a camera and a theory already forming. Just the slope, the air, the stone, the dark drop. Somewhere inside, the surfaces that started the debate still exist. They do not care whether we call them natural or artificial. They do not become smoother because we wonder at them, and they do not become less strange because someone explains them. They simply hold their shape in the cold underground. Above the shaft, life goes on in the North Caucasus. Weather moves over the ridges, clouds catch on the peaks. Villages wake and sleep. Roads carry people past landscapes older than any map. The mountain remains part of everyday life for those who live near it, not only a mystery for distant viewers. That is worth remembering. Places like Khara-Hora are not just puzzles for outsiders. They are part of someone's home, someone's memory, someone's view from a window, someone's childhood story about where not to go after dark. The hidden shaft belongs first to the land around it. So what may it still be keeping beneath Russia? It may be keeping the answer to how a mountain can make walls that look almost made by hands. It may be keeping traces of people who once entered a natural opening and left marks too faint for casual eyes. It may be keeping the remains of a shelter, a mine, a ritual space, or nothing human at all. It may be keeping a warning about rushing toward grand claims. It may be keeping a reminder that the past is not always where we expect it, and the earth is not always as simple as it looks from above. Most of all, it may be keeping the unfinished conversation between stone and curiosity. And now, as our slow journey through Khara-Hora comes back toward the surface, we can let the mystery remain open without forcing it to become larger than the evidence allows. We have followed the shaft from discovery to geometry, from possible use to natural formation, from wartime shadows to symbols and silence, from tragedy to the quiet absence of full modern study. The answer has not appeared in a single bright flash, and perhaps that is fitting. Some places are not solved like riddles. They are approached like mountains, slowly, carefully, with respect for loose stone and changing weather. If you are listening late at night, perhaps the image to keep is not one of fear, but of patience. A rope descending into darkness, a lamp touching a smooth wall, air moving faintly from somewhere unseen, a mountain that has waited longer than any of us can imagine, and may wait longer still before anyone asks the right question in the right way. Whether Khara-Hora is an ancient structure, a natural wound, or something in between, it reminds us that Earth still has hidden rooms, hidden histories and hidden shapes that can make even the modern world feel unfinished. And maybe that is enough for tonight. Not certainty, not a sealed answer, just the quiet knowledge that somewhere in the North Caucasus, beneath stone and rumour, there is a shaft that made people wonder, and that wonder is still drifting upward through the dark. Sleep well, fellow traveller, wherever you are listening from, and may the mysteries of the earth feel a little less sharp and a little more gentle as the night carries you onward